Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee. Welcome, everyone, including our presenters and our committee members. If we can start the meeting with a series of introductions and a call of the roll. Gail, if you'd call the roll and see which ones are here.
David Bailey. Carolyn Brown. Hoyt Prindle. Christina Bosworth. Christina, I see you. Can you reply that you're here?
Yes, I'm here.
Miaza Morrison.
I'm here.
Stephen Hollenkamp. Nicole Rice. Alexis Boback.
Good morning.
Christina Acosta.
Here. Good morning.
Aya Yasin. Artie Fryer.
Here.
Bill Roberts.
Here.
Nicholas Glover. I saw him. He's on the attendee side. Don Skelton.
Okay.
Jeff Lucas. Jonathan Knudsen. Cliff Reese.
Here.
Sharon Gamond or Eric Lamb. Rick Fernandez.
I'm here.
Terrence Trott. Amy Espinoza. Rick Richmond.
Here.
And Joshua Frank.
Present.
And that completes the roll call.
Gail, I see that Stephen Hollenkamp logged on. I just made him a panelist. And I also see that Nicholas Glover's here. I can't make him a panelist for some reason. He might be logged in from his phone.
I'll go ahead and check the attendees and the online.
Okay. Oh, and Aya is also here.
Good.
Johnny.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Those who can make it, we may have some joining us as the committee meeting proceeds. At this point, I'd like to call for public comment. Are there any person signed up for public comment?
All right.
Johnny, do we have anyone with their hand raised?
Chris Vila has his hand raised. Let me see if I can figure out how to unmute him. Chris, when you logged into the meeting, it should have given you a PIN. You have to enter the PIN for us to get audio connection. Do you want us to give you a couple minutes to try to get that squared away? Otherwise, you can type a message into the chat and we'll read it for you. All right, he wrote me a note in the question saying he needs a couple minutes to get that PIN issue straightened out. Mike, if you're here, would you mind helping him out?
Yes, no problem.
Yeah, let's give Chris a minute to get signed in. We'll come back to public comment. Is there anyone else signed up for public comment?
No one is signed up, and I don't see any other hands going up in the chat.
Okay, very good. We'll come back to public comment in a moment. Since we do not have a quorum and we're not in person, this is a meeting where we'll not be able to take any action, nor will we be able to take any votes. However, I would like to get comments from the committee on both of the presentations today that would have otherwise been action items. We'll do the same thing with the approval of the minutes. We cannot actually take a vote to approve them, but if anyone has any comments or corrections, we'll accept those comments now and vote on the approval of the minutes at a future meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections on the minutes of the September meeting?
Chair, this is Rick Fernandez. I have one.
Yes, Rick, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. On page 1 of the minutes, under alphabet C, my name, the third line, tip by amendment in May 2012, that should read 2021. That's all.
Okay, good catch. Good catch, Rich. Thanks, Rick. Any other comments from the committee members on the minutes? All right, we'll make a note of that correction, Rick. Thank you. And we will see if we have set our technology such that we can take public comment yet.
Public comments are able to be taken now.
Okay. Well, Chair will recognize Chris Vella. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Sorry I had a senior moment with those PIN numbers and whatnot. I'm hoping that you guys don't have a quorum and maybe you can just make a motion to delay the item 6B in your agenda. It would be helpful. I think that way it would give people opportunity to understand what's going on. I'm calling because I'm opposed to the amendment. Obviously, you all know that I'm against the interstate expansion and anything that goes into it. I think the question that the CAC committee needs to ask is why the TPO is recommending this. They just founded a Title VI and non-discrimination plan. They launched Vision Zero programs, and they also launched any other like land use and equity programs tied to transportation. And I think the question should be fair, like, how does this fit into the context of those programs? Vision Zero, in my head, is a street that is under 30 miles an hour. Vision Zero, in my head, is a street where all people can use the road. You don't have that ability with the interstate system. It's not a Vision Zero corridor. It'll never be, because freight lobbies Washington, D.C. constantly for speed to go above 50 miles an hour to maintain that. 50 miles an hour will kill somebody. And then 2, pedestrians are not allowed to be on the interstate system themselves. So I just don't understand the logic here when FDOT's trying to frame it as a Vision Zero corridor. But what really bothers me is that the MPO staff is recommending this. And I think what we need to do is question the staff as to why they're pushing this in conflict with all their other programs. And then, the other thing is, for the past 6 years, we've had this discussion about the interstate system. You all know what's going on, blight and pollution and so forth. But realize that with the West Shore Interchange, if we wanted this, West Shore Interchange is actually connecting streets across their interchange system, while for us, FDOT is still keeping our neighborhoods broken and divided. So even if we wanted this, it still is not fair. It still does not meet, I would say, any type of motion to go towards a non-discrimination plan. I think this is something that just needs to be funded. I don't think it needs to move forward. And like I said, I think the best thing you can do right now is to just delay this action, give us more time, and have conversations with MPO staff about this. It just doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Johnny, any other public comment?
I don't see any other hands raised, and I don't see any other comments in the chat.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda would be our action items. As I mentioned, we're not able to actually take a vote without a quorum on these, but I do want to have the presentations, both of them. And following the presentations, I'll take comments and suggestions from the committee members. So at this time, let's take item 6A, the letter on the rapid flashing beacons at crosswalks. Gina Torres, are you going to do this one?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Gina has a vacation day today, and so I'll be presenting that item. Beth Alden, TPO Director.
Well, Beth, you're welcome. I'm happy to have you. And Gina probably deserves a vacation day. Go ahead.
She does. She does. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the photograph. So first off, what is a rapid flashing beacon? It is a traffic control device that is used at crosswalks. Generally, the intent of it is to increase driver awareness of pedestrians using the crosswalk. And so it basically, the reason why it is effective is that the beacons start flashing when the pedestrian who's ready to use the crosswalk hits the button. And so drivers are then alerted that there is someone actually in the crosswalk and they need to be sure to yield. These are much cheaper to install than Hawks, which is another traffic control device, which actually creates a traffic signal that cycles to yellow and to red and then back to green. A beacon like this costs about $20,000 versus a full traffic signal that goes all the way to red, like I said, costs approximately $200,000. So that's a factor of 10. In Hillsborough County, we have about 170 of these. Pinellas County, which piloted these a number of years ago, has more than 300. They have been documented to be very effective at influencing motorist behavior. The studies point to an increase in driver yielding to pedestrians in the crosswalk from 18% yielding to 88% yielding. So that's a really significant improvement. Of course, it's still not perfect, but there are drivers that don't even yield at red lights, as we know. And so the rapid flashing beacon is actually a recommended practice by the Federal Highway Administration. It's one of what they call the Spectacular 7 countermeasures. I have seen them in particular on Fletcher Avenue near USF. That was a very high crash area between Bruce B. Downs and Nebraska. And since the rapid flashing beacons have been installed there at crosswalks, we've seen a 46% reduction in injury crashes and a 60% reduction in deaths. So the reason why we're bringing this to you today is that there have been bills filed in the Florida legislature the past 3 sessions to basically stop using these devices. And it's because there was a heartbreaking crash in a community on the East Coast where there was a young girl who turned on the flashing beacon, stepped into the crosswalk, and the driver did not yield and she was killed. And it was, of course, very tragic. And it is a tragic story when we bring it, it is brought up every year at the legislature. And the bill that is filed basically says we should remove all of these unless they can be converted into red lights. Unfortunately, that is very unlikely to be approved by the Federal Highway Administration. The request is that that be changed in the manual on uniform traffic control devices. And if they cannot be converted to red lights, then they must be removed. So that's basically the content of the bill. Removal is going to be expensive. Trying to convert these all to full traffic signals is also going to be expensive. As I mentioned, the full traffic signals are 10 times the cost. As you know, we are already up against funding shortfalls, and removing these protections for crosswalks is likely to have, at least in our community, a significant impact on underserved communities where we have a higher prevalence of traffic fatalities and serious injuries. So it's been suggested to us by some of our legislative delegation members who are under a lot of pressure from the Republican leadership to go along with this bill to remove the rapid flashing beacons, that a letter writing campaign would be useful. Often it takes a bill 3 sessions to get approved by the legislature, and we're coming up on that this year. So we've been working through the Suncoast Transportation Alliance to try to organize a letter writing campaign. And you see in your agenda packet the letter that was sent by the Transportation Management Leadership Group, which is part of the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. And we'd like the support of our committees to have the Hillsborough TPO transmit a similar letter. And we're also asking all of you if you would care to share this letter with organizations that you may be part of, and ask them to also participate, and let your legislators know that taking this tool out of the toolbox is not productive, and it's not going to improve safety in our communities. So with that, I'd be happy to take your comments and questions. And I understand that you can't vote on this, but if you could provide comments, we can share those with our board.
Thank you, Beth. I think that's a good summary. I see Mr. Fernandez hand up. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Beth, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thank you for that. And starting the day with a scratch my head moment, because this makes absolutely no sense to me anyway. I certainly support your request, and if it comes to a vote or a recommendation, I'll be in that corner. But I do have a couple of questions. First, is there a speed limit associated with the location of these flashing lights? More hypothetically, if an area is posted at 45 miles an hour over a distance of 2 miles, and we install one of these blinking crosswalks somewhere in the middle of that, is there a reduction of speed limit as one is approaching the crosswalk?
So that's a great question, and it's something that's been talked about quite a bit. So the DOT guideline on this is to use it in areas of 35 miles per hour or less. I don't know if Pinellas County has always done it that way, but they have indicated in our regional discussions that they are open to that, as like if the legislature needs to move forward with something, that they'd be open to that restriction. And it might even encourage like revisiting the speed limits in some of these areas. I think some of these roads are posted at 40. And so it could trigger a discussion about reducing a speed limit in an area that might be appropriate to have a 35 mile per hour speed limit.
Frankly, I think it would be irresponsible to have these in areas where people are still cruising along at 45 or 50, or even in some cases 55, 60 miles an hour, because they exceed the speed limit routinely. It truly is a death spiral at that point. So yeah, if we can get people into the crosswalk in an area where folks are traveling at a speed sufficiently low, so if there is a collision, at least the human has at least a chance of surviving it, That would make a lot of sense to me. I have just one other question, Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Is there a lobbying effort supporting the removal? And if so, who is behind the lobbying effort?
Right. So the bill has been filed by Randy Fines. He's been the champion of this because it was in his community where that young girl was killed. And he's been a very, very strong and passionate advocate for this.
Is there a group that has developed around that effort that can be identified as a lobbying group by name or otherwise?
Not that I know of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll tender.
Thank you, Rick. Any other questions from the committee or comments? I don't see any
Mr.
hands, but
Chair,
I'm not sure I see everyone.
I have a
Yeah.
lot of backlight here. It's
Christina Costa.
Good morning.
Yes.
Thank you, Beth,
Go
for
ahead.
bringing this to our attention. And I will also be in favor of retaining the RRFBs, but I wanted to comment on Rick's remarks about the speed limits. One of the positive effects of the RRFBs is that motorists who use a particular corridor frequently, like all of us when we go to regular places, we begin to anticipate that we might have to slow down in an area where an RRFB is installed. So the ongoing speed reduction and awareness that stop may be triggered on these routes is really the long-term benefits, the overall reduced speed. But I also have to say that I really appreciate the complexity here because Beth, you said the effectiveness was 88%. That's higher than I've heard in the past. I've only heard 80%. And there was a similar fatality in St. Pete on the complete street that was installed. A woman crossing with having enacted the RRFB was killed right outside of a grocery store there on MLK in St. Pete. So 20% failure is still so high that I can really appreciate individuals who are feeling like it's just another Band-Aid solution for a very high-speed environment, and it's not good enough. But I do believe that it's all we have right now, and we have to keep what we have in order to keep moving forward. One other thought I had, Beth, was if you could touch on the comparison to installing a real signal is cost prohibitive, but are there instances where four-way stops could be utilized that would be less expensive? Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Christine. Beth, you want to respond?
So four-way stops are less expensive. I think that a lot of the locations that we're looking at here are on 4-lane roads where there's a predominant traffic direction, as opposed to typically at four-way stops, you're talking about two-lane roads intersecting with each other, and there may not be a primary direction of the traffic volume. And so what we've heard from the engineers is that they would like to be able to tailor the engineering strategy based on the context and use the right tool that's in the toolbox for the context. And I'm very sympathetic to the concern that we need to ratchet back what that context is and ratchet back our expectations for speed. But I think the point that we're trying to come together on as kind of a coalition is just let's leave this tool in the toolbox so that we can keep working on on all fronts, on all locations, on managing speed appropriately.
Okay, thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? Josh Frank, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just Christine stole a lot of my thunder, but basically what I was going to say is I think it's important to remember that these are a tool, one of many, and in most cases are used in situations where the road is over-engineered to begin with. So this is sort of a backwards compatibility issue of trying to create a safe pedestrian environment in an inherently unsafe pedestrian environment. So, and that's not always the case when an RFIB is used. So I'm very supportive of having as many options available as possible. So I would be supportive of this letter. But I think the bigger picture is we need less RFIBs in general because we need better roadways to begin with. So I think, as a tool, it's great, but the bigger perspective is let's have less trips, less wide lanes, convert those four-way arterials into three-way, safer roads with lower speed limits. All of those things need to be sort of kept in mind as the bigger picture, and the RFIBs are merely a tool to get us there. So just worth pointing that out, I think. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Josh. Rick Fernandez, have a comment?
Quick follow-up question, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Beth, you used the term spectacular 7 countermeasures. Love it. Not that this is a quiz, but what, to the extent you can remember them off the top of your head, what are the other 6?
Yeah, Gina gave me some really good notes on this. I asked her to go and look up what Federal Highway had said about this. Federal Highway actually has, they have a program to help states share successful innovations with each other. And one of those was what they called safe transportation for every pedestrian. And so what they did was to actually bundle together a bunch of mostly low-cost treatments that have been proven to have a real benefit for safety. And so the list is rapid flashing beacons, leading pedestrian interval LPI. So this is at your traffic signal, when the light changes, the light for the pedestrian crossing comes on just a couple of seconds before the green light for the cars. And so what that means is the pedestrians are already like partway out into the crosswalk at the time that the cars are given the green light, which makes drivers more aware that they're supposed to yield to the pedestrian that's in the crosswalk. You're not in this kind of, trying to look at each other to figure out who's supposed to go first. So leading pedestrian intervals, road diets, raised crosswalks, refuge islands, hybrid beacons. That's the hawk that I mentioned earlier, that cycles to yellow and to red and then back to green. And then crosswalk lighting and signage. So just making the crosswalk more visible, especially at night.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Thank you, Brad. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this presentation? I will make my comment is that I like these beacons. I travel Fletcher Avenue, and so Beth's example is one that I have personal experience with. I think they've been highly effective and maybe more effective. Anything that technology can do to possibly give the pedestrian a slight delay after the beacon goes off, because it does require a certain level of responsibility to not walk out in front of the cars if the cars haven't begun to slow. But I'm fully in support of this resolution that's come before us. I think these things have been very effective. I see them around the county a lot, and I'd like to keep them in our toolbox. Having said that, With the committee's permission, I would like to report to the TPO board that although no action was taken, no one voiced an objection to the proposal to submit this letter. Is there any objection to my making that report? And I thank you very much. Beth, thanks for the presentation. I think we're in good shape with this one. And with that, I'd like to move to our next agenda item, which is the TIP amendments as outlined and presented in your packet. We have a couple of representatives from, or at least a representative from FDOT, and then Connor McDonald from our staff. So Mary Lou Godfrey, are you going to lead this presentation?
Yes, I am, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the Tampa Bay Next program. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And for the Tampa Bay Next program, which is a program to modernize our interstate system. And particular today, I'll be talking about the downtown interchange aesthetics. Next slide. As part of the PD&E commitments, this project has extensive requirements to match the existing aesthetics within the project limits to be consistent with the Tampa Interstate Study Urban Design Guidelines. The existing aesthetics at 14th Street and 15th Street will be replaced. The interstate improvements included provisions for the development of pedestrian and bicycle accommodations on cross streets beneath the interstate. As a result, at Palm Avenue, 14th Street, and 15th Street underpasses, sidewalks will be widened by cutting back the slopes and providing a gravity wall. All underpasses will have upgraded lighting. Existing landscaping and irrigation impacted by the projects will be replaced. In addition, landscape opportunity locations will be identified. As part of the PD&E commitments to include provisions for the development of pedestrian and bicycle accommodations, the Tampa Heights path on the west side of I-275 north to Columbus Drive and south to Skate Park or will be connected, and new paths along east of I-275 and north and south sides of I-4. As requested by the City of Tampa, solar lighting will be added to the shared use path, meeting their requirements. Next, please. New roadway lighting will match the existing poles. Existing lighting will be upgraded to LED lights, and under deck lighting will be upgraded to LED wall packs. Next, please. New LED lighting will be installed on the widened bridges at 14th and 15th Street. Bridge beam lights will be upgraded to LED lighting, and new 5 globe lights patented for the historic district will be installed along the south side of Nebraska Avenue, the south side of 14th Street, and the south side of 15th Street. And again, the shared solar lights for the new shared use path will be installed throughout the project. Next. All structures will be monotube as shown here. All ground mounted signs will be single post signs, and all signs and sign structures will be powder coated along with the backs and signs of supports. Next. Noise barriers and visual barriers will match existing barriers, which includes the dental detail and slope top, Class 2 smooth surface finish, and staining. The new exit ramp to 15th Street will also have a visual barrier included. Next. Proposed retaining walls will require to match the existing either the shell, floral, and limestone texture or brick pattern texture. Next. To continue to be consistent with the urban design guidelines, mesh wire welded fencing will be required for at-grade applications as seen on the left. A modified special provision will be provided to provide this in the project. Black vinyl coated chain link fence is allowed on sloped areas as shown to the right. Next. There are several types of specialty pavements at select locations within the project limits, consisting of patterned pavement crosswalks, hex pattern stamped concrete sidewalks, brick intersections, hex paver sidewalks, and brick sidewalks, as seen in the pictures here. Next. Oops. I think there was one, okay, maybe we lost a slide, but anyway, all of the 14th, 15th Street historic Ybor City features will be replaced, including the existing medallions, existing specialty brick, existing metal picket fencing, and existing brick towers. And thank you. That's a summary of the aesthetics for the downtown interchange.
All right. Mary Lou, does that conclude your part of the presentation?
Yes, it does.
All right. Thank you. Connor McDonald, are you going to
Yes, sir.
expand the presentation?
Yes, sir. Connor McDonald, TPO staff, good morning. I'm here to present the 14 amendments, including three projects, including the downtown interchange safety and operations adjustments, the West Shore Interchange Reconstruction preliminary phase, and the traffic congestion management technology, also known as integrated corridor management. Next slide, please. These amendments came from the governor's announcement on September 13th for funding for Tampa projects. The first set of amendments, again, is the downtown interchange for 3 amendments, roughly equaling $154 million. The next group is 5 amendments for the West Shore Interchange Reconstruction preliminary phase at roughly $80 million. And the final set is 6 amendments to traffic congestion management technology for roughly $24 million. These 3 projects equivalent to roughly $258 million. Next slide, please. So the first group is the downtown interchange safety and operations adjustments amendments. Next slide, please. Mostly all of those who have driven the downtown interchange know its problems well. This includes long congestion of lining up to get to the I-4 exit towards Orlando. The congestion can sometimes go all the way back to Hillsborough Avenue. Drivers often lane dive into the exit at the last possible second to avoid waiting in the congested line. It also prohibits access to local exits, especially Florida, Nebraska, and occasionally even MLK. The downtown interchange is also cited in the long-range transportation plan as a priority for the region, and it's also a top 20 Vision Zero corridor. Next slide, please. There are 3 proposed changes to alleviate these problems. The red being westbound I-4 to northbound I-275, the yellow being westbound I-4 to southbound I-275, and the blue being southbound I-275 to eastbound I-4. Within these arrows, there's approximately 222 annual crashes. Next slide, please. These quick fix safety and operational adjustments will reduce the previously stated lane weaving and speeding, the congested and lining up with I-4 exit, and improve access to the local exits. Next slide, please. FDOT is measuring that the downtown interchange will reduce deaths and serious injuries on I-275 near I-4 by nearly half, and a 14% traffic reduction in local streets. So continuing on this topic of traffic reduction on local streets. Next slide, please. The downtown interchange is also planned to improve connectivity and safety on the local street network below. There's a proposed trail system that will connect Tampa Heights Greenway project to Ybor and Encore development. Further, these improvements will complete streets under the interstate to connect the communities. Next slide, please. These tip amendments are also intended to relieve some issues on the local network, like drivers driving too fast on and off the interstate ramps and difficulty in seeing at night. Some mitigation strategies include reduced lane widths and having a high emphasis on crosswalk markings. It also includes curb bulb outs at side street intersections. The next slide, please. This slide shows typical street sections, 14th and 15th Streets. While FDOT is responsible for the work on 14th Street, the City of Tampa has plans to improve 15th Street through the Green Spine project. These changes include sidewalks going from 5 to 6 feet and lanes being narrowed. Next slide, please. So the first amendment in this set is amendment from right-of-way acquisition to right-of-way and utilities. Next slide, please. Preliminary engineering, environmental care, and design build for a total of around $26 million. This section is the westbound I-4 to northbound I-275. Next slide. The next amendment is an additional $60 million for westbound I-4 to southbound I-275. Next slide. The third amendment in this downtown interchange project is adding $66 million for the I-275 southbound off-ramp to I-4. These three amendments make up for roughly $154 million. Next slide. So the next group of amendments make up for the West Shore Interchange reconstruction preliminary phase. Next slide. These 5 projects are preliminary projects that make up for 1 out of 4 phases of the West Shore Interchange. The West Shore Interchange has been a top priority for many years. These changes will reduce congestion and weaving at the intersection of State Road 60 and I-275, and will also complement the Howard Franklin Bridge reconstruction. Next slide, please. The first project, westbound State Road 60, will construct 1 general purpose lane along westbound State Road 60 from the George Bean Parkway to Courtney Campbell Causeway. Next slide. This project has a total of around $36 million for utilities, preliminary engineering, environmental care, and the design build. The next project, next slide, please. Will extend a new seawall and construct an adjacent shared use path along the north side of the I-275 causeway. Next slide. This project has a total of nearly $37 million. The next project in the next slide is Cyprus at LaSalle Street. These 2 low-volume roads are near business parks. They will be widened to enhance connectivity to 2 off-ramps and 1 on-ramp to the West Shore Tampa International Interchange. The project cost, shown on the next slide, is an estimated $3.6 million. Amendment 13 on the next slide is West Kennedy Boulevard at West Kennedy Boulevard. It will allow for the construction of additional left and right turn lanes, one from eastbound Kennedy to eastbound Kennedy, the other from westbound Kennedy to westbound Kennedy. FDOT believes these will also facilitate traffic and mobility during future interstate construction. The project has a total of nearly $2 million, shown on the next slide. The next slide, please. The final West Shore Interchange Amendment is a project to add a right turn lane from eastbound Boy Scout Boulevard to southbound Lewis Avenue. This project has a total cost of around $527,000. Shown on the next slide. The next slide, finally, the Integrated Corridor Management or Traffic Congestion Management technology will allow Traffic Control Management Center to manage congestion among several key corridors. The next slide. These corridors include Nebraska Avenue, Tampa Street or Florida Avenue, Hillsborough Avenue, Dr. MLK Jr. Boulevard, Boy Scout Boulevard, and Kennedy Boulevard. The next slide, please. These systems include advanced detection monitoring systems, dynamic message signs, and closed circuit television. They have the goal of making work zones safer and improving travel time reliability. Ultimately, they will deploy technology to allow engineers to see what's happening with traffic in real time. Next slide, please. The first of these amendments is at roughly $5 million for design and build on Florida Avenue or Tampa Street. The next slide shows roughly $6 million for Nebraska Avenue and Kennedy Boulevard to Bears Avenue. Next slide, please. The third amendment is to change funds for roughly $4 million for design build of ITS systems on Kennedy Boulevard from West Memorial Highway to Ashley Drive. The fourth is Amendment 18 for funding equaling $3.8 million of ITS systems on Dr. MLK. The fifth amendment is $3.3 million for ITS systems on Hillsborough Avenue from Veterans to west of I-4. Finally, the sixth ICM project in amendment number 20 is $1.6 million for ITS systems on Boy Scout Boulevard from Airport Service Road to Delmate Highway. Next slide, please. As part of our public participation pilot, we're aiming to ensure that the public has had the opportunity to voice their concerns and support before they come to the committees and the board. Next slide, please. One of the outreach projects came from the Long Range Transportation Plan outreach survey that received 5,200 responses. In this survey, respondents were given 4 options regarding a downtown interchange reconstruction. While the no build score was higher in downtown areas and the full rebuild rating was higher in ex-urban areas, the safety and traffic quick fix option had the highest star rating overall and supported or unopposed by most zip codes. Next slide, please. As part of the pilot, we asked jurisdictions what sort of public outreach they have done. FDOT, in this case, has done significant outreach regarding the downtown interchange since 2017. This has involved a series of community and neighborhood events, community working groups, and neighborhoods and stakeholder presentations. Next slide, please. As part of the pilot outreach, the TPO has also done outreach for these projects. This has included a press release to roughly 30 media outlets, 100 neighborhood associations and community groups, social media outreach, 6 signs posted, and a webpage for more information. Next slide, please. So the left graphic shows the social media outreach, and the right 3 signs showed 3 of the 6 signs posted near the project locations. Next slide, please. There have been some clerical corrections since your mail-out packet. The West Shore Interchange originally was described as westbound express lanes to Courtney Campbell, Independence, and Veterans. It's now corrected to westbound general purpose lanes to Courtney Campbell, Causeway, Independence, and Veterans. There's also been a change at Kennedy Boulevard and Memorial Highway. It was originally described as a left turn lane from eastbound Kennedy to eastbound Kennedy. It's now corrected as a right turn lane. There's also a Hillsborough Avenue integrated corridor management change. The original project limits described as Hillsborough Avenue from I-275 to I-4. However, it's now Hillsborough Avenue from Veterans Expressway to I-4. Next slide, please. With that, the recommended action is to approve the amendments. However, I realize that while the CAC does not have quorum today, so I recommend a healthy discussion on these amendments. I'd also like to provide Ms. Godfrey's and my contact information if you have any questions post our discussion today. With that, I open the floor for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Connor. Before I take comments from the committee, let me ask if there is a time sensitivity to the presentation of these amendments, since we do not have a quorum.
I think at this point, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. Chair, I forgot to bring this up earlier. I think we bypassed members' interest, so that's something we'll have to revisit toward the end of the meeting. But we're hoping to wrap this conversation up. After a healthy discussion, we budgeted about 40 minutes for the presentation plus questions. Because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, I think we could probably wrap this up by 10:45 and still be on target to get out of here at noon.
Okay. And my question also was in the broader context of, do these amendments need to be approved by this committee or the TPO in order to get them in the FDOT pipeline?
Sorry for that misunderstanding. Yeah, we have this scheduled to go to the board next week. So we would like for all the comments to be received today. If there are any that require response from DOT, we'll transmit them ASAP. There's a number of staff from FDOT on the call right now, so they should be tracking any questions or issues that come up. And hopefully we can get all this resolved before Wednesday. We'll, of course, present the comments to the board as part of the committee reports.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. And I do apologize to Cliff Reese. I skipped over members' interest, but I have made a note to come back to that, Cliff, so bear with me. Okay, at this time, we'll take comments or questions regarding the item B on our agenda, 6B, which is the TIP amendment. Rick Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn my video off because it seems to be stressing my capacities here. So let me lose my face. Okay, hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes,
I have what probably will evolve into a series of questions for Mary Lou and Connor. So Chair, whenever you feel the need to cut me off, please let me know and I'll shut up.
Okay.
Connor, let me start with you, if I may. I don't know if we've met. I'm Rick Fernandez, and by way of full disclosure, I'm out of Tampa Heights. I live literally in the shadow of the downtown interchange. So the discussion here about the DTI hits me literally where I live. So I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I have expressed concerns in the past about the use of the TIP amendment process outside of the normal annual review in May and June. And I'll note that we just went through a TIP review process that ended just 4 months ago in June of this year. So my question to you is, these are fairly elaborate and extensive TIP amendments that you're requesting here. What is it that we know today in October of 2021 that we did not know in June of 2021 that would have precluded these presentations at that time when the requests were given much more in the way of public scrutiny?
Rick, I'm actually going to field questions on behalf of Connor. He's the newest member of the TPO, and he's on my team.
Okay.
That would be a funny joke to baptize him by fire by giving his first assignment as the TIP amendment. And he's done great, but since he's not too familiar with the TIP process, I'll take it. In short, I don't think we know anything now that was not known in the TIP update in June. The purpose of the TIP amendment is to reflect that state funds, some state and federal funds, have been directed toward these projects that we hadn't expected in June when we updated the TIP. Remember that these projects are already on the priority list, and so implicitly, at least, the committees and the board have given their approval for these to move forward. We were anticipating receiving this money at some point in the future. We didn't realize it would come this soon. So the reason why we're doing a TIP amendment now is because the governor's office found some money, made it available, and said that it can be directed toward these projects. And this is really just an administrative issue, I think.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Johnny, and Connor. I certainly didn't mean to put you on the hot seat there. Welcome to the TPO staff, and I appreciate, Johnny, your response. Mary Lou, if I could, are you still up there somewhere? I don't see your face. Are you still on?
Yes, I'm still on.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Last time I talked to you, you were giving me information about right-of-way acquisition that was very helpful. So thank you for that. And let me move into the DTI aesthetics. Given my earlier disclosure about where I live in Tampa Heights, I'm particularly concerned, for purposes of this question, of the stretch of 275 from Martin Luther King to Columbus, which is not suffering any right-of-way taking, but is being impacted significantly by increased capacity as a result of additional lanes on 275 southbound and then eastbound over to Orlando. I heard nothing in your presentation about aesthetics in that section of the corridor. Again, Martin Luther King to Columbus. Basically, the frontage road there is Elmore, and we're talking about the border of Robles Park to the east, and we're talking about Elmore as a frontage road from Florabraska to Columbus, which, again, full disclosure, happens to be the street upon which I live. I've heard nothing in terms of aesthetic improvements regarding impacts to that area. Could you amplify, please?
Yes, we currently, we have a project that's under construction or just let for construction in that area. And a part of that project is to add additional noise barriers along that project. The downtown intersection improvements complements that project. So the lanes complement each other both on the southbound and the northbound. So the lanes that are being added for the downtown interchange will complement those that are added for that project. That section is considered our transition area between, I guess you remember from many of our meetings, there's a section 6 and a section 7, and your area falls in that transition, which is part of the construction that's about to start. But we certainly can show you more on the section, it was included in the section 7 aesthetics, what will be included there.
All right, you can show me as in you can show me now, or you can show me as in sometime after we're supposed to take a vote on this or have a discussion on this.
Well, the part that you're describing is not being voted on today, has already been part of the construction project for section 7 that is underway now. So I can show you at a later time those improvements that impact where you live.
All right, well, do you know, just by your general information as a DOT employee and given your focus, what the mitigative aspects are along Robles Park and along Elmore? Do you know at all, or would you have to research that?
No, we do have, as I mentioned, there's some noise barriers being added along that area, and not exactly in the Robles Park because that's not indicated as a generator when you do the FHW noise barrier analysis, but anything on either side has been covered with noise barriers as part of the project. And again, the specialty fencing that we mentioned here, all the Tampa Interstate design guidelines are being followed.
All right, I'm gonna have to come back to you after this meeting. Then I expect a call, and
okay.
I'll add on to members' interest a request for that additional information at a future meeting. You made comment somewhere along the line about the color of the walls, the facings, and I am particularly concerned about noise barriers along Robles Park. I am meaning the park on between Emily and Florabraska, and noise barriers between Florabraska and Columbus. The former, there are no noise barriers. The latter, between Florabraska and Columbus, there is a noise barrier there. It's basically the wall for the flyover ramp, and it is pure white. It's one of the colors that you showed in your presentation. It is very reflective of heat. It is very reflective of noise. It is frankly a real detriment to the neighborhood. And I really would like to discuss the landscaping opportunities and the facing opportunities for those walls. And I suspect those concerns would be shared over in VM Ybor and historic Ybor City as well, because we all face the same problems. But I will give you a call on that. Maybe we can have coffee, and okay. I'll request that as a member interest later. Thank you for now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Other comments? Josh Frank, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have similar to Rick, a series of questions that will probably evolve. But two in particular, I guess the first is that first section of the tip for the downtown interchange, $154 million, I think it was. It's funny how Tallahassee can invent money for these projects at a whim, it seems. Can I get an explanation? I've heard now several times I-275 as a Vision Zero initiative or a Vision Zero corridor. Can somebody give me an explanation on how this project is considered Vision Zero? I don't know if that's staff or if that's Mary Lou.
Yeah, that would be a question for us. The way that we rank the Vision Zero corridors is according to fatal and injury crashes per center line mile. And I don't know off the top of my head where this segment ranks among the top 20, but I see Beth just turned her camera on. She's probably more familiar with that than I am.
Johnny's perfectly correct. We did the identification of the high injury network based on the density of crashes that had deaths or incapacitating injuries. And this interchange area, specifically I-275 in the vicinity of I-4, was in the top 20 segments in the county.
Josh, I'm not sure if you're referencing something I heard Chris Vila say earlier regarding pedestrian access on the roads. I don't believe that that's one of the criteria that we looked at to qualify a corridor or a segment as part of that high injury network. I think it really is just the number of fatalities and crashes per center line mile.
Yeah, no, it's not in reference to that. It's sort of tangential to that. I heard it during Connor's presentation. I believe there was some mention about this being included as a Vision Zero initiative. And, you know, just from my perspective, and this is not a critique of staff or this decision, I find that laughably formulaic and inadequate, because Vision Zero is not adding capacity to an interstate. I think that's directly in the face of what Vision Zero stands for, which is reducing not only vehicular crashes, but pedestrian fatalities, bike fatalities. And the number one foremost way every city that's come close to achieving Vision Zero has done that is by reducing trips entirely, not adding trips to the network. So I think that in and of itself is just a major dissonance between what I think the MPO, or sorry, the TPO, the city and the county are trying to achieve with Vision Zero, and borderline offensive to the Vision Zero movement, both for us as professionals, but also for those of us who are advocates and have been for a long time. I'll table that though, because I think that's more of a personal distinction and not as important. I'm curious, on a related matter, you know, it seemed like that segment that was dealing with the 14th and 15th Street, which I believe came to $26 million, somewhere around there in that specific table. Similar to other conversations around Vision Zero, including even potentially the Rapid Beacon conversation, 21.6. To see that roadway section for the first time on 14th and 15th with 11-foot lanes and 5- and 6-foot sidewalks is also, I think, woefully inadequate towards achieving Vision Zero and, frankly, just having a decent street section. I know that the city is working on 15th Street and adding the cycle track there, and those have 10-foot lanes. And Mary Lou, I know I've spoken to you and other DOT representatives in different forums, but you know, as soon as this thing hits the ground, this needs to be Ybor City and not DOT standards. So I think 11-foot lanes and 5- or 6-foot sidewalks is really not anywhere close to what would be considered acceptable from a neighborhood perspective. And in fact, having sat on the YCDC, I know for a fact Ybor City does not want these exits, period, let alone inadequate exits. And that sentiment has been reflected in that forum and other settings. So I also think it's important for this board to know Ybor City, in terms of the YCDC, has voted against supporting these exits and these design standards. So I would ask that perhaps maybe, Mr. Chairman, if you could include some of that in some of your sentiment to the board. This is a project that even the folks that it impacts most directly do not want. And then the last question really is maybe a bit wonky. The Nebraska Avenue ICM ITS portion, does anybody know if that's going to actually, for once and for all, give Metro Rapid any sort of signal prioritization? That was promised as part of that project a decade ago now for HART, for the buses to actually have signal prioritization. As far as I know, they only have it on one signal. So I think, as a measure of good faith, it might be beneficial for FDOT to consider actually implementing that to some extent. I may be wrong on that, but that's just something that stuck out to me as part of that conversation, that we seem to be doing this again, and it'd be great if Metro Rapid was actually rapid as part of this project. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Johnny, do you have a response with regard to the timing on Nebraska?
I don't. We have been working with FDOT staff trying to get the project managers to come to our ITS committee and explain in greater detail what these projects will include. The way that we receive the amendments, the project is described in fairly simple terms like ITS communication system, intelligent transportation systems. That could be a range of treatments. Some of the specific projects some of the specific technology that we've been told will be out there: fiber optics, they're laying down fiber, roadside units, sensors, CCTVs, but we're not really sure which corridors are going to get what combination of those treatments. So we're trying to get a little bit more info on that, and as soon as we get answers, we'll pass it to you.
Well, then, just as a follow-up, if I may, I would highly suggest that be part of the conversation, because that was promised to this community over a decade ago, that essentially that was going to be a BRT project, and is now just a glorified traditional bus route with one signal prioritization. So if ITS is truly the goal for that corridor, I'd like to see that promise fulfilled.
And let me ask the DOT representatives on the line if any of them have an answer as to whether or not the Nebraska Avenue signal timing is included specifically in this TIP amendment or not. Does anyone know?
This is Justin Hall with FDOT. We're looking into that right now. I can't confirm whether that is or not. So I messaged the project manager and waiting to hear back. So if we hear during the time of this meeting, I'll let you know. And if not, I'll let Johnny know after the meeting to follow back up.
Okay, good. Thank you, Justin. I think that's a specific and important question that this committee would like to get resolved. Yes or no? Either way. Any other comments, questions?
Chairman Roberts, this is Justin Hall. To
Yes.
Josh's point on 14th, we've been working with the city of Tampa on that typical section. And so that, I think most of the feedback for that typical section would need to go to the city of Tampa. So DOT's agreed to construct those improvements as part of the DTI to help mitigate some of the safety concerns on 14th Street, but the typical section really has been driven by city staff. So maybe we can set up a meeting, Josh, with Vic to kind of talk through it. So DOT, with that not being our road, I mean, we're open to doing whatever the city would like us to do on that road to help calm traffic. So we're definitely open to that conversation.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it. Josh, you okay with that response?
Yes, that works for me. Thank you.
Okay, and I think further communication with the city as to the design criteria would be helpful. Any other committee members have questions or comments regarding the TIP amendments that are proposed? Christina Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mary Lou. Hello. It's good to see you. Regarding the application of the chain link and the fencing that goes around the projects, it's been my observation that they are installed in a manner often that precludes access for the disabled or the people walking and biking to get to perhaps an adjacent street crossing, or there aren't any curb cuts. So I just would like to ask that sensitivity be made to preserve access. Don't use the fencing when it abuts a sidewalk that the neighborhood needs and they can't get to the sidewalk. Just to say it very simply, we're really in the West Shore area, there are several examples where a cul-de-sac, if you will, was created just because the interstate cut off traffic flow for cars, but inadvertently and seemingly without much consideration, the traffic flow for people walking and biking was also cut off. And so the images you showed us of the chain link material reminded me to ask you to be sensitive to those conditions on these in these areas. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Christine. Other comments or questions from the committee?
Chairman Robert.
This is a large set of amendments. It's due to go board next week. I'd like, yes.
Chair, this is
Yes,
Justin Hall with
who's that?
FDOT. We got the answer for Josh Frank. The answer is yes. We have a meeting set up with Hart to discuss signal prioritization for Metro Rapid on Nebraska. So that will be part of that project. We're just working through the details with Hart.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Justin. Rick Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I'm
But we
gonna shut my camera off again. This is just a quick follow-up for Connor or Johnny, whomever. I just want to make sure that I heard the presentation correctly, because frankly, I think it was the first time that I heard the survey results broken down the way you presented them today. I probably have just been asleep at the switch for the last 2 years and just never heard it right. But I think what I heard you say is that the survey results, as they were generated out of the downtown interchange area, those would be people that actually live in and around the downtown interchange, was a preference for the no build option. Is that correct?
No.
Connor? Yes. So the slide that I'm showing on my screen right now is showing results from the second phase of our long-range transportation plan survey. We did that back in 2018 or 19, I can't recall. We asked specific questions about the temperature of several designs for the downtown interchange. As you can see, the top left, when we asked for feedback on the no build, the highest scores were generated from the communities right underneath the DTI. And when we asked for feedback on other designs, results were a little bit mixed. When we say that the safety and traffic quick fix design got the highest overall score, that's weighted across, well, it's showing results across all the zip codes that gave responses. As you can see, there's a little bit of a blend between yellow and blue. Those on the outskirts of the county toward the northeast had a little bit less support for that, but the safety and traffic quick fix was supported pretty highly by folks living up and down 275.
Okay, so my takeaway, let me just give you this in Rick speak, if I might. If you live in the shadow of the downtown interchange, your preference was for no build, basically leave us alone. If you lived in the rural area, you probably tended more toward a full rebuild. And the average for the community was what you're defining as the safety and traffic quick fix. Is that a fair regurgitation in my own language?
I wouldn't say that that's an unfair assessment. It's a little bit difficult to qualify all that because you can see that this zip code right near the DTI. Results weren't overwhelmingly supportive of the no build. There's actually a fair amount of responses that we received of people that didn't necessarily prefer that alternative.
Okay, and could you remind us, just in closing, if you know, what were the total number of responses received on this survey?
5,200.
5,200, 5,200. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Other questions or comments regarding the TIP amendments? I would like to give the TPO board a sense of our committee. And I think what I'm hearing is that there were some significant questions raised. There was a lot of territory covered in these 14 amendments, but there was no particular consensus amongst the committee to support or not support the amendments as presented. Would that be a fair summary that I could report to the TPO board? Anyone object?
Mr. Chair, it's Christine. I think
Yes.
it might be appropriate to, I'm sorry, I turned my camera off.
Okay.
I think it would be fair to include that in addition, public comment and several CAC members have asked that this not be defined as a Vision Zero, that terminology be removed. I don't want to say rebranding, but that I think that is we did hear that and I echo it. So that might be something that could be shared as well if you agree it's appropriate.
I think that's perfectly appropriate. Thank you. All right. Well, seeing no further comments or questions on the TIP amendments, we'll close this portion of the meeting. I would like to go back on our agenda. I inadvertently skipped over members' interests, and I know we have one and possibly two comments. Cliff Reese, you're recognized. I'm sorry, Johnny, before I go to that. Johnny, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if I may add, so while we don't have a quorum, which would allow the committee to take action today, I just want to reiterate that we're still collecting comments. Any individuals on the committee that feel strongly that their concerns have not been addressed or feel strongly enough that their concerns may represent a fatal flaw, they can definitely contact us through our Facebook page, Twitter. They can email me, Connor, Beth. We'd be happy to receive all those comments and then provide them to board members ahead of the presentation next Wednesday.
Good. Thank you for providing that outlet. Okay, now I will try to move back to members' interests, and I'll recognize Cliff Reese.
Thank you, Bill. I came across a project that's somewhat in my backyard a couple of days ago. It is the intersection improvement for Baum Riverview Road and Sims Road, where they intersect. Baum Riverview is a fairly heavily traveled north-south road. It, starts at 301 up in, by the river, by the Alafia River, and it works its way down, to Big Bend. And Sims Road is a T intersection which heads to the west from Baum Riverview, just below the Riverview High School. I noted that there was a public engagement opportunity from Hillsborough County, and looking at the comments, most of them favored installing a traffic signal versus installing a roundabout. However, the county's proposal is to do a roundabout for several reasons. First, it's a lower cost, and comparing the cost of a traffic signal at that intersection versus the one they're putting down at Rodine and Baum Riverview, it's consistent with lower cost for the roundabout. Secondly, the roundabout is not going to impact any residences. It will require a little bit of land acquisition to the east side of the intersection. but that is a combination of vacant property and a little bit of infringement upon one homestead plot, which is where the house is set fairly far back. So again, it's little impact, which is a positive there. The roundabout proposal includes, striping sidewalks, pedestrian islands, bike lanes, all the good stuff that we like. And I'm actually in favor of the roundabout, but I did reach out to the project manager, who's Irina Orbain, with one question about roundabout capacity. The roundabout that they're proposing is a single lane roundabout. And while I have seen statistics that show a roundabout, of that type can handle 22,000 vehicles, a day, I'm more concerned about volume and how the roundabout would function in periods of high traffic volume, morning and evening rush hours. And my specific concern that I've asked Irina for some feedback on, and even access to the planning documents, is as follows. As a driver, when I'm about to enter a roundabout, I have a yield sign, and I need to make a decision. Is a car that is already in the roundabout going to continue, traveling through the roundabout, which means I need to yield until they've passed me by, or is that car going to exit before they reach my entrance, providing a gap for me to then enter the roundabout? We know that Florida drivers tend not to use turn signals. Florida drivers are not familiar with roundabouts. So my question essentially is the size of the roundabout sufficient so that drivers waiting to enter the roundabout will have enough time to make a decision as to, will there be a gap coming up because the car coming around is exiting, or do I need to wait because that car may continue, traversing the roundabout, and there won't be a gap until potentially the car, until they've passed. I don't know if this group has seen any information about how roundabouts function and the size of the roundabout impacting throughput. Given that Balm Riverview is very heavily traveled during morning and evening rush hours, I am waiting for some feedback from the project manager as to what is the real capacity, real time, not just on a 24-hour basis. Anybody have any input or comments on what my questions are?
Hey, Clifford, it's Christina Costa. I'd like to respond.
Sure.
To be honest with you, I'm extremely disappointed that price was the #1 value or element that was cited on the project as the rationale for the roundabout, because they provide so much more safety and are much more environmentally friendly. So those are the values that I hope are being welcome. I can't speak to the specific parameters of the roundabouts, but I will tell you that the decisioning that you mentioned, you describe as you enter a roundabout, there's that pause and the yield and all that. But once I've had the opportunity and delight, frankly, of using roundabouts all over the world, and once you get the hang of it, there's really it's much more organic movement of traffic and connectivity between different motorists who are navigating the space, and everything happens with much better sight lines and at slower speeds. So I just wanted to express that the roundabouts are just a great way to go. So I'm really happy that you favor that, and that whole decision moment fades after you use the roundabout, maybe 2-3 times. It's just very free-flowing but slow traffic and safe. So I think you'll experience that.
I apologize if I implied that cost was a determining factor. I asked the cost question just for background and was delighted to hear it is cheaper, but I don't believe it was a determinant.
Okay. Good.
Thank you, Christine.
And I guess drivers who use it on a regular basis daily will as you said, learn how to make use of it. But I'm still interested in do they have any capacity studies that they can provide me?
Volume, yeah, good question.
So that's your follow-up for a member's interest item, is to try to get that information for our upcoming meeting, right?
Correct.
Okay, good issue. Rick Fernandez, you have a member's interest item?
Yes, sir, I do, Chair. Thank you. And shut myself off again. There you go. I just had the opportunity for a road trip up to Vermont and back over a period of 2.5 weeks. And as much as I tried to shut off all things Tampa, and in particular transport related, it was virtually impossible on those stretches where I was unavoidably on interstates. And I tried to avoid those too. And I was just struck by the effect of walls and landscaping along certain areas of the corridor heading up the eastern seaboard, and the stark distinction between what I saw there and what I see here in the urban areas of Tampa. I know we've had discussions about it before, but in all of the discussions that we've had about the downtown interchange and the operational improvements in West Shore, the word tree has seldom, if ever, come into the discussion. And what really struck me was not only the height and the color of the sound walls that are being utilized in other areas of the country, but the fact that those sound walls are almost universally bordered by forests of trees. It's amazing. A 10 to 15 foot sound wall is bounded to the outside by a 20 to 25 foot tree. And the effect of that is quite striking and aesthetically very pleasing, and I suspect very beneficial to those who live on the other side of the wall. So what I'm asking by way of member interest and follow-up with DOT is the extent to which we are even considering the greening of this corridor, be it by trees or landscaping or in some other way, to soften the effect of the sound walls and to increase the benefit of both noise and pollution, noise pollution and air pollution along these corridors. So member interest, trees along the corridor or some variation thereof. I'd like to hear from DOT about what they're doing there. Second, follow up to my questions with Connor and Johnny. I would like a presentation at some future meeting, probably sooner than later, given how fast these TIP amendments keep coming, on the amenities that are being considered on the corridor from Martin Luther King Boulevard, specifically to Columbus, although the operational improvements take more than that, but that area in particular, and to the west side of the interstate. So Martin Luther King to Columbus on the west side of the interstate, which is effectively the eastern border of the Tampa Heights neighborhood. I'd like to hear about what's being planned there regarding mitigation, landscaping, the walls, color of walls, etc. Thank you.
Okay. I think, Johnny, if you would coordinate with the FDOT and try to bring that information back, hopefully maybe even at our next meeting.
Yeah, definitely. Cliff, I'll reach out to some contacts in Hillsborough County and see if I can get info on those roundabouts for you. And Rick, I will get in contact with Mary Lou and see if we can schedule a presentation, maybe November, to have her discuss those improvements.
Okay.
Good. Anything else on members' interest that the committee would like to bring up? Well, thank you. And again, I apologize for having skipped over that item. The next item on our agenda is the series of status reports. The first is the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Mobility Element. Katrina Corcoran, are you going to give that one? Yeah, good. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Are we ready for my presentation?
believe we are.
Okay, awesome, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Katrina Corcoran, Planning Commission staff. I'm here today to present on the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan, a mobility section text amendment. This is HCCPA 2116. I am the co-lead on this update along with Rich Clarendon, who is also here and will be available for questions with me after I give this presentation. Next slide, please. So starting off, we have some background on the mobility section. It is currently the transportation element of the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan. It is part of the Community and Built Environment chapter of the Comprehensive Plan, which also includes future land use and housing. We've had an extensive series of working group meetings to develop this language, and that includes staff from Plan Hillsborough, Hillsborough County, including Public Works and Community and Infrastructure Planning, HART, and other staff based on topic area. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I don't know if it's not changing for me.
My internet just cut out. Katrina, did you ask me to cut the slide? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Johnny. So the mobility section policy language is implemented and impacts regulations and ordinances, capital projects, education and outreach, and coordination with other implementing agencies, for example, HART. Next slide, please. So there are several key changes to the mobility section language as it moves from the current transportation element to the new proposed mobility section. First off, we have a focus on equity. So if you look at the draft language, which is available on our project page, you'll notice that we have a couple of current transportation element policies that have been modified. However, a lot of the objectives and policies within the equity section, which is our first section, are new. We focused on institutionalizing Vision Zero. So the current transportation element does have some safety language. However, it was last updated in 2008. And we've worked to update that language and incorporate Vision Zero into the new mobility section. We have language on addressing resiliency in transportation. We also have an objective on establishing a multimodal level or quality of service standards. One note on this, while we do have the language on establishing and maintaining those standards, the working group is still working on the standards themselves, and those will come forward with the capital improvements element, which is tentatively scheduled for spring 2022. So these standards themselves are not within the mobility section. We have worked with HART on coordinating transit service with land use and updating our policy language on that. We have a build a smart system section, which is goal 5, which includes leveraging benefits of the county's advanced traffic management systems. We've worked to update outdated references and concepts within the section. For example, older plans that are referenced in the language since it was last updated in 2008. We also have a section on preparing for emerging technologies. So that includes anything from e-bikes and scooters all the way to connected and autonomous vehicles. And finally, we've incorporated context-based roadway planning and design principles, and that is primarily through the context-based classification system, which is a map and definitions included as a part of this mobility section update. I'll be getting into more detail on that on further slides. So the mobility section, this slide gives an overview of the goals and contents. Again, I'll give more details on each of these goals in the following slides. We also have an implementation and monitoring section, which is essentially a reference page. It will not be adopted, but it will link to related implementation documents that the county is working on currently. We also have an assessment of conditions, which is our mapping inventory. So we're updating a lot of the transportation element maps that have not been significantly updated since 2008. Most of these maps will not be adopted. However, a couple will be. Most notably, the context-based classification map that I mentioned earlier will be an adopted map. Next slide, please. So our first goal here is to achieve equitable outcomes. And one note on these following slides, the goal is written in full as it is reflected in our draft language. However, the objectives are summarized, so the language may be slightly different. So please note that. Our goal here reads to build a transportation system that supports the needs of all users with respect to ability, resources, identity, and mode preference. And our objectives include engaging the public to ensure everyone can collaborate and provide input on transportation planning and implementation, considering both positive and negative socioeconomic, physical, and mental health impacts of transportation projects, especially on underserved communities. And finally, recognizing and avoiding repeating past injustices, striving to alleviate or mitigate disproportionate burdens on underserved communities. Next slide, please. Our second goal is to achieve Vision Zero by providing a multimodal transportation system that prioritizes the safety of all roadway users. Our objectives here include using an integrated safe systems approach, developing and designing improvements. And for those of you who are not aware, that safe systems approach is essentially Vision Zero's response or an engineering response to Vision Zero. So redesigning roadways to provide tolerance so that there are less injuries and fatalities on the roadways. We also have protecting vulnerable users such as children and the elderly through that safe systems approach, speed management, and context-sensitive multimodal facility design, assisting in equitable education and fair enforcement of traffic laws for all road users, and finally, using that safe systems approach to identify and improve high injury corridors. That includes collaborating with other agencies involved with Vision Zero, as well as referencing the TPO's crash reduction targets. Next slide, please. Our third goal is to maintain the system in good repair, preserve assets, and improve resiliency to climate change. Our objectives here include maintaining existing transportation infrastructure while repairing or replacing deficient facilities, supporting the maintenance of public transportation assets. So for the county, that includes not only continuing on with Sunshine Line, but also assisting HART, for example, if there is a sidewalk connection needed near a bus stop, that sort of thing. Maintaining or improving the capability of the multimodal system to evacuate vulnerable populations, as well as enhancing the system's resiliency to withstand and recover from a disaster. I will note on this objective that is required by state statute. Next slide, please. Our fourth goal here is to provide choices when not driving, and it reads to create a sustainable transportation system that allows people to take their mode of choice to access necessities, opportunities, recreation, and each other. We have several objectives here, including balancing vehicular capacity with fiscal, environmental, social, or economic outcomes. Some of the policy language for this objective includes language on constrained and deficient roadways. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we do have an objective on establishing and maintaining multimodal level of service standards. So looking not only at traditional vehicular LOS standards, but expanding that to pedestrian, bicyclist, and transit standards. We have an objective on new development providing mobility fees to mitigate its impact on the multimodal network, updating the corridor preservation plan and ensuring adequate multimodal corridors. I will note here that we do have some policy language that has an emphasis on connectivity, which has been a point that the BOCC has been interested in. We have several objectives on supporting and collaborating with HART to increase frequency to higher density and intensity areas, as well as transit-dependent communities. And finally, building a comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian system for additional trip purposes. Next slide, please. Our fifth goal is to build a smart system, and it reads to build a smart system that utilizes technology and strategies to improve safety, efficiency, and reliability for all modes of transportation and to meet the needs of all users. Again, we have several objectives here, including addressing deficient roadways and safety of all users, to enhance traffic flow through technological solutions, as well as modernizing the county's traffic management center to monitor and optimize the multimodal system, increasing person trips and reducing vehicle miles traveled through transportation demand management, or TDM. So that includes strategies such as shifting from single occupancy vehicles to vanpool, carpool, or other strategies such as flex time or telecommuting, as I'm doing right now. We would also implement comprehensive multimodal parking and curb space management programs. So for the curb space management, that would include high activity areas where there may be a lot of Uber and Lyft pickup or drop off, or grocery delivery or drop off, that sort of thing. We also have an objective on pursuing corridor widening strategically only after lower cost alternatives have been considered. Also improving multimodal connections to major military installations, tourist destinations, airport, port, ferry, rail, and intermodal terminals. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, monitoring and supporting emerging technologies and strategies for transportation facilities. So this includes everything from e-bikes and scooters all the way up to connected and even autonomous vehicles. Next slide, please. Our sixth goal is to ensure compatibility with context. So the goal here reads to provide a multimodal transportation system that supports planned future land use, respects historical and cultural assets, supports the identity of the surrounding community, and protects the natural environment. Our objectives here include designing roadways appropriate to the future land use category that they traverse. So you heard me mention context classification at the beginning of this presentation. Here we will have defined those context classification those definitions via a table, and we have a context classification map. You'll notice the graphic at the top right, and when we talk about those classifications, that's really what we're looking at is designing the roadway based on the land use. So for example, rural, suburban, or urban context. We have an objective on minimizing adverse impacts to residential and commercial neighborhoods and environmentally sensitive land, protecting neighborhoods from adverse impacts of through traffics and speeds while providing reasonable access to and from those areas. And finally, constructing complete streets to achieve safety, comfort, and aesthetics for all expected users and modes. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have an implementation and monitoring portion. Guidance documents and standards will be reflected here as they become available. Currently, we are in the July cycle for the plan amendments, and we're bringing this mobility section comprehensive plan amendment forward. The county is working on several related documents, including the Complete Streets Guidebook, the Transportation Design Manual, the Transportation Technical Manual, as well as the Corridor Preservation Plan update. So all of those will be linked here as they become available. Next slide, please. We do have a mobility section project page. I believe I've shown this to you before. You're able to review the latest draft language. We'll note the date that the language was last updated there, as we are still receiving public comment and feedback from both the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. You can also see what's new versus existing and compare the existing adopted language with the proposed. I would recommend looking at the very bottom of the project page. We have other documents or supporting documents. We have what we call crosswalks, which are Excel files that show the current adopted language and what has been done with that language. And we also have a crosswalk for proposed, which shows the proposed language and the original language for that as well. You can review previous presentations and other background information. So we have several, we had virtual public meetings on this information, answered questions. Those are recorded and available, linked on the project page, as well as the briefing in front of the Planning Commission, which happened on September 14th, as well as the briefing of the board, the BOCC, on September 28th. Those are also available there as well. We do have some upcoming meeting dates and items of note. Our current public comment period is available on the webpage, and you can provide feedback or questions there. That is open until October 15th. So if you have any questions or comments, please strive to get that in prior to that closing date. Our upcoming meetings include a November 8th public hearing with the Planning Commission, as well as a December 16th transmittal hearing with the BOCC. Of course, you're welcome to provide public comment at that time. However, as we're working to finalize this language, we'd love to hear from you now if you have any questions or potential changes to the language. And again, the link is available at the bottom of this page. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my presentation on the Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Mobility Section Text Amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, and Rich is here as well to help answer questions. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Katrina. Welcome, Rich. Josh Frank, you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have two, actually. The first one is this the mobility section of the comp plan, is that entirely different from a design element within the comp plan? And if so, or if not, is there a plan to include a design element within this current comp plan update?
Thank you, Josh, for the question. So this is the mobility section. We do have the future land use element, which has not yet come forward to be updated. The plan is to update that in tentatively spring 2022. There is a community design component of the future land use element, which I think gets a bit more into what you're discussing with the design component. We have looked over the flu extensively to see if any of those, the flu policies were better suited in mobility. So if you look at the language, you'll note some of the items did come from the flu and some of them may have come from that community design component. However, I think that would be more, the flu aspect may have more of those design aspects. I would also note that the county is in the process of updating their transportation technical manual and transportation design manual, which will probably get into more detail, engineering detail of that. I don't know the exact time frame on that, but I'm certain that we can give that information to you as it becomes available. Again, I think that might have more detail.
Yeah, and that kind of, I guess, answers my question, because one of the sections that I've caught my eye not too long ago was it's actually, I wrote it down. It's Florida State Statute 336.045 number 6, which is the you know, the one that states essentially that the Department of Transportation shall essentially follow what either the county or municipality has declared to be the preferred design to the maximum extent possible. So it's a tool or a note. I don't know if this is new or newly updated, but gives the county or the agency, in this case the MPO or TPO, I got to get that right, the more power to determine what happens on their facilities, even if FDOT is constructing them. So I think that in light of a lot of what's been said in this group and others, that's something that could be a very important tool, and I'm happy to share that section specifically in the chat afterwards. I'm sure you're aware of it. The second question that I had is a little bit less wonky, but if you could go to the slide that you talked about, your achieving equitable outcomes, number 1. I can't also help but notice the photograph that you've chosen in reference to a lot of our previous conversations this morning. Sorry, keep going. It's the one with the big bullet, number 1 on top, says achieve equitable outcomes.
It should be one more slide, Johnny.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you.
So I couldn't help notice that photograph because if, for those who maybe missed it, that is an interstate exit with, you know, nicely new brick and design improvements from FDOT, yet is still inequitable in terms of its impact on the local network. So just in light of previous conversations we've had today and in the past, I think it's important to again recognize and point out this level of dissonance that I mentioned in the FDOT portion of today's meeting between what is described in terms of Vision Zero elements and equity, as well as the next slide, Johnny, if you would move forward, and Vision Zero elements, but what we're actually getting, which is what's in that first photograph, which is essentially brick and fancy looking stucco and no sidewalks and poorer outcomes. So I would highly suggest that those number 1 and number 2 find a way into some of the other bigger, broader conversations that are coming forward as part of the TIP, including things that we've talked about with FDOT. So just again, not to be pithy, but further pointing out that what I see is that really strong level of dissonance between what we're talking about and what's actually being put on the TIP. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Good comments. Other questions or comments regarding this great presentation?
Mr. Chair, I noticed Christina Bosworth has her hand up.
Oh, yes. Christina, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't know how to use, this is my first time with WebEx, so I don't know how to use the official hand raising. I just have to kind of wave my hand in the air. Yes, Katrina, my question also has to do with the equity side, the first goal. It talks about equity for underserved communities. I just want to ensure that those underserved communities, is there a definition of that that's used? I want to ensure it's not just urban communities, but also would include those in rural areas such as like Waimama, which is in my backyard, which is a small town but considered rural, and it's very underserved. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Of course, thank you very much for the question. So for underserved communities and the definition of that, we do have a map linked to our non-discrimination plan, which was recently updated. And so we are using that map to describe the underserved communities that we're referencing there. And it is available on our project page. You would have to give me just a moment to find the exact map number, but if you go to our project page, at the very bottom, you'll see adopted and non-adopted maps. And that map is included, I believe, in the first set of maps. So they're just to be able to fit everything in there, we have one set of non-adopted and a second set of non-adopted. I believe it's in the first set. And because those maps are still draft, we actually don't have map numbers assigned, but I believe it's near the bottom of that PDF, and that would show you. And again, that linking back to that non-discrimination plan, some more information on that can be found in our non-discrimination plan on our website.
And if I can chime in, this is Rich Clarendon. Yeah, Waimama is one of those communities.
Good. Thank you, Christina. Anything else, Christina? Okay. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, this is Artie Fryer, and I don't know how to raise my hand with this either, but
Artie,
I'd like
to.
Right, thank you. I'd like to include an addendum to the past two questions in terms of that number one. One of the items that was mentioned is identifying and correcting past injustices. And I'm curious what has been done to identify what those injustices have been, particularly in regard to people with disabilities, ethnic or racial injustices. And I ask that because if you're going to correct them, then I think it's incumbent upon us to identify actually what they were so that we don't repeat them. And I'm curious as to what process has been done to identify what they have been. That can include urban and rural areas. Obviously, there have been some that have existed, but how do we know what they are?
Katrina?
Thank you very much for the question. We did work closely with the planners that assisted on the non-discrimination plan update on the development of this language to ensure that, especially this equity portion, reflected our work on that non-discrimination plan. Regarding past injustices, specifically, we're considering a lot of the highway expansion that has impacted neighborhoods traditionally and historically. Looking at the specific policy language that we have there, it includes prioritizing transportation projects in underserved communities, which we just referenced with that map from the non-discrimination plan, which will be included as a part of the mobility section update. So prioritizing those projects that increase access to community services and employment opportunities, ensuring projects that are traditionally cited as serving a larger need. So for example, highway expansion on that or regional connections, making sure that those are aligned to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts, particularly those resulting from expanded right-of-way to neighborhoods in underserved communities. We also have a policy on increasing access to convenient and affordable transportation options, such as frequent bus service, and prioritizing communities that have historically been underserved, underrepresented, or have borne unequal burdens. We also have a policy on engaging business stakeholders to assess workforce mobility needs, ensuring companies and employment centers have access to the full range of the labor force, including those without personal transportation, And finally, we have a policy on encouraging private transportation networking companies or TNC operators to share data that supports ongoing transportation planning and implementation. So making sure that that data is available and accessible to us. That, unless Rich has anything to add, that would be my answer to that question. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. If I can tag on to that, again, this is Rich Clarendon, and I appreciate the question. I mean, I think there are a couple of different answers to Mr. Fryer's question. You know, probably the most prominent example of you know, past injustices. And by the way, I'm sorry I can't show my camera or turn on my camera. I'm having some technology issues this morning. But anyway, some of the most prominent examples, I think, are you know, where in the past decisions have been made to you know, put highways through existing urban fabric. I mean, that's part of the whole interstate history, unfortunately. But I think another example or sort of paradigm that represents maybe a past injustice is just overlooking communities. And Ms. Bosworth referenced Waimama. You know, that's a community that's sort of on the urban fringe and was developed sort of in a haphazard manner. And you know, honestly, there are some streets, and I would put air quotes around the word streets, that were platted, that are private. They were never really accepted by the county, and they're substandard. And yet there are people living on those streets that you know, are asking for assistance in terms of getting them paved or graded or just maintained better. And the county's hands are kind of tied because they're privately owned streets. And you know, why that happened in the past, I can't tell you. I'm not familiar enough with the history, but you know, we get phone calls like that asking what can be done. And so that's an example, I think, of where we could do better as a community and as planners. So those are just a couple of examples that come to mind. But you know, I think the whole point of this goal relating to achieving equity is to be sensitive to those kinds of historical situations and you know, make every effort to avoid repeating them. So you know, that means reaching out to those communities well before a project is ever drawn up, and finding out, you know, what are the community's needs before we put pen to paper. So that's my kind of long-winded answer to Mr. Fryer's question.
Thank you, Rich. Other questions? Well, Katrina, thanks for bringing us this information. The public comment period, I guess, runs through October 15th. So certainly our committee members can provide input directly to you or through the website, right?
Of course, and my contact information is available on the project page. Please feel free to email or call me if you have any further questions or comments. We will again be accepting those comments through October 15th, but we certainly can answer questions at any time. So thank you very much.
Good, thanks. Thanks for being with us today. The next item on our agenda is item 7B, the keys to mode shift. Sarah Hendricks from Cutter, I think, is going to give part of this, along with our own Christine Acosta. Welcome both.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we also have Ken Bowden from Tibarda on, Johnny?
Yeah, just made him a panelist, so he should be able to unmute himself. Chair, while they get their tech issues set up, I wonder if now's a good time to introduce our newest member of the CAC.
Yes, please go ahead.
So our newest member is Christina Bosworth. Christina, typically we just have new members identify who appointed them, what part of the county they live in, and state any interest in transportation or experience. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Johnny. Yeah, my name is Christina Bosworth. I was appointed by Commissioner Mariella Smith. I live, as I said earlier, Wimauma is my backyard. I live in Wimauma. I've lived in Hillsborough County for 10 years. I have not been involved in transportation other than being an avid bicyclist, so I'm all about those bike lanes. But I had been very involved in Wimauma's recent update of their village plan, the land use rules. So I became involved with that piece of the Planning Commission. That has sort of wound down a bit. We're ready for the BOCC to adopt it this month. So I now am jumping into this, and so bear with me as I learn. I don't have any history of transportation planning other than my work. I'm retired, but my working background was in materials and logistics, so I'm aware of the freight movement piece also. So just bear with me as I'm learning how this committee works, and I hope I have some valuable things to offer. Thank you.
Good. Well, we welcome you to the committee, and it's good to have representation from the Wimauma area.
Yes. I would like to say a special welcome to Christina and tell the committee that she's a bit of a celebrity right now because she was pictured in Creative Loafing because we did a very fun Fancy Women bike ride. That's a global event, and Christina and I happened to meet there, and I'm just excited to receive her on the CAC. And Mr. Chair and Johnny, if it's a good time, I'll start with just a little remark about our presentation now. Are we go?
Please, go ahead.
Okay, super. I'm just really pleased to bring this deeper information and review of transportation demand management to the CAC. We all benefit from understanding how the projects that we review and discuss actually become meaningful contributors to our goals, the goals that were just so beautifully stated by Katrina Corcoran about multimodalism, economic advancement for all, improving quality of life for everybody, and of course our favorite, traffic mitigation and reduced vehicle miles traveled. First up, Sarah is going to speak for us, Sarah Hendricks, and she's going to give the overview of what transportation demand management is, kind of a big picture. Then I'm going to share some examples with the committee of some best practices that I have recently shared on a local project in our area. And then Ken Bowden with TBARTA is going to provide a snapshot of what TDM, what that looks like and feels like today in our community. And then at the close of our presentation, Sarah Hendricks will provide an idea of what the CAC and TPO can consider. One idea, should they opt to move forward with more transportation demand management. So I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
team. And Johnny, you can advance the slide to the next one. So I'm going to talk about some dry stuff, and that's the definition of TDM, while Christine and Ken are going to have the fun stuff in our presentation. But it's important to go over the definition of TDM because I think a lot of people are confused about that concept. And I think partly that has to do with the fact that there are numerous definitions of transportation demand management. And I think that is because it tends to be defined in the way in which it will be applied to accomplish something specific. So on the slide here, we see is Christina Costa has defined TDM as the blending of facilities, land use policies, and programming to achieve mode shift away from single occupant vehicles. And the emphasis here is on shifting people away from driving alone and towards some other mode. And that's exactly right for what it is that she seeks to accomplish on behalf of the community that she's working with. Next slide, please. So the state and governments have their own mostly similar definitions, but there is a bit of a difference there. So the Florida Department of Transportation, that's the first definition on that slide. It defines transportation and management as a set of specific strategies that promotes increased efficiency, and the highlighting is mine there. Efficiency of the transportation system by promoting and providing a range of travel-related choices to influence individual travel behavior by time, frequency, trip length, cost, or route. The Federal Highway Administration, which is the second definition there, has a slightly different emphasis relating to managing demand, and that is providing travelers with choices for the purpose of improving travel reliability. And so reliability has to do with the predictability of the travel time of a trip, and that's based on the federal transportation system performance metrics. So the state and federal governments have different priorities and define TDM in a slightly different manner. Next slide, please. And Johnny, you can skip over this. This was a duplicate slide. Thank you. So there's more information about transportation demand management, and it can be found in a new document called the Tampa Bay Area Commuter Assisted Regional Development Plan. It can be found at that link. There's 40 different recommendations on how to incorporate transportation demand management at the state, regional, and local levels. But what I'd like to emphasize here about transportation demand management is that it has great flexibility as to the location that it's applied to. It can be implemented on varying geographic scales, and this would include things like applying TDM region-wide or applying it to a specific corridor, applying it to a particular office park, or even down to the individual work site. TDM can target specific markets. It's very highly customer focused. It can be implemented quickly at low cost, and the timing of the implementation of the TDM strategies can be controlled. TDM can be designed for a variety of different purposes to achieve many different kinds of objectives and outcomes, depending on the problem to be solved. Next slide, please. So the Puget Sound Regional Council is a metropolitan planning organization in Washington State in the Seattle area, and they have one of the strongest TDM programs in the United States. And the emphasis of their plan is on removing barriers experienced by travelers. The focus is on helping people use the transportation system to better meet their mobility needs. And so the building blocks of transportation demand management are things like information, education, outreach, programs, services, incentives, disincentives, and partnerships to accomplish these goals. Next slide. And so another way of defining TDM, and this is my last slide, is in terms of how it differs from the other efforts in transportation planning. So what we see here is we build a physical transportation system that provides the capacity for travel, as shown on the left, a highway facility, Bruce B. Downs at 9:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. That was last week taken. On the right is our transit system, which needs much more investment in terms of its capacity in the way of coverage, frequency, and bus duration. But there's a separate field as transportation system management and operations, TSM&O, and it focuses on reducing recurring congestion that's generated when highways do not have enough capacity to handle the demand during the peak hours, the morning and evening peak hours. So TSM&O regulates travel demand in through things like dynamic tolling, metering, signal system optimization, and variable speed limits. So this is for the purpose of improving motor vehicle traffic flow. So transportation demand management, on the other hand, focuses on the travel decisions that are made by travelers before they even start their journey, so they can take advantage of other travel choices that might better meet their needs. So I'm going to hand it off to Christine.
Thanks, Sarah. Great job. You can all appreciate now how TDM doesn't really fit into a thimble when you're trying to talk about it or tell people about it. And also it's not a good, kind of elevator speech, but that's what we're trying to get to, Sarah, Ken, and I. I wanted to start my few slides with this graph that, we spend a lot of time in our vision and our transportation planning is often with the notion of very long trips, but in actuality, over 45% of all trips are 3 miles or less. So that gives us an enormous pool of potential to positively affect 45% of the trips that would be in these smaller, lower distance. Next slide. So I had the privilege of working on one project. This is an image of what was proposed in the Rome Yard, for Rome Yard. And this is Tampa's the West Tampa redevelopment area. If you are not familiar with it, understand that it's 120 acres. There are going to be over 1,600 new residential units. It's being designed and has, the CRA has done a great deal of community engagement there over many years. And so it's just, its proximity to the urban core is ideal. And so this land use is already being prepared for readiness of where TDM is concerned. So, it's car optional, live, work, play. And one of the reasons that this is an especially appealing example locally is because we have a lot of people moving into the Tampa area. And if you're like me, you hear from community members or friends or family members saying, where are they all going to go? And we don't want the kind of growth. But what most people are saying is they just don't want more cars. So we have the potential to affect modal changes. There are studies that reflect that when you make a big change in your life, you're more likely to make other smaller changes. So for instance, when you relocate or move, you're much more likely then to consider changing your modal decisions. Next slide, please. So what we did in this proposal is we looked for TDM solutions and applications that are being used elsewhere globally and in the country. We got examples from Seattle, from Arlington, Virginia. This is the image on the left is from an Italian firm. And so we want to look at modal support that includes facilities, services, and amenities, not just codes or policies or implementation of, put a couple bike racks out front and hope for the best. So this would be images of long-term bicycle parking for employees and residents. Next slide. Then we talked about short-term bike parking and using actual methods to create placemaking through the facilities that are built into the community, like these placemaking bike racks and also murals, things that are graphically interesting and vibrant. Next slide. Curb management was something that Katrina included in her presentation. But in this regard, we want to make sure that our curb management, and every time we're talking about first and last mile for transportation demand management, that we all remember that we must include commerce as a part of our first and last mile, because everything that we buy and procure in our community that is economically very important also must travel the first and last mile. So curb management is one way that we can facilitate, and also opportunities to reserve curb management or give priority to the preferential behavior that is being used in modal choice making, like allowing individuals to be economically elevated through gig work like Uber Eats delivery personnel, and of course vanpooling, which Ken will touch on in a minute. Next slide. This is really an important part of what we want to convey right now, that combining the connective tissue of how we really affect change in our community has to include behavior modification and, as Sarah said, incentives and disincentives. But these real-time screens that exist in high-rise condominiums or any dense area, whether they be residential or commercial office space, give users and people in that space real-time information of how many electric bikes are outside the door, what time is the next number 12 bus going to be around the corner. This is all information that helps people break that practice of I'm going somewhere, I'm reaching for my car keys. Next slide. Super. I'll turn it over to Ken now for his part.
Hey, thank you. My name is Ken Bowden, and I work with TBARTA, the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority. And I work in commuter services. I actually manage the program. And I want to just tell you a little bit about what we do. We work with employers. We work with employment centers on the best ways to move people from work and back. Our goal is to relieve stress on the transportation system by normalizing transportation options like biking, walking, carpooling, vanpooling, the use of transit, the use of this broad range of micromobility options, and by helping employers maintain a really robust work from home option for their employers. Next slide, please. We help employers facilitate programs that meet our goals of reducing traffic congestion with the employer's goals. And sometimes the employer has a goal to attract and retain employees. And so they want to put together and package together a transportation benefit for their employees. Sometimes they have a goal of reducing traffic pressure at their facilities. So we work with them on that. And other times they have greenhouse gas target reductions that they're trying to achieve. And we'll work with them on that as well. Next slide, please. Actually, we're kind of advancing ahead of my slides, but that's okay. I want to talk a little bit about one of our programs, Vanpool, and why it's so important for our region. Vanpool is really very much like carpool. 4 or more people volunteer to ride in the same vehicle back to work and back. And TBARTA, through our partner Commute with Enterprise, helps to make Vanpool formal by offering a $400 monthly subsidy to help reduce the cost. To receive this subsidy, each Vanpool is required to report the number of miles traveled each day and the number of people in the van, which TBARTA, which I then report to the National Transit Database, NTD. And this is really important because NTD helps establish formula funding for transit, which ultimately comes back to the region and importantly to Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. I am advancing ahead. I apologize for that. Vanpool, in addition to this subsidy, also qualifies for the pre-tax transportation benefit. The benefit allows the employer and employee to set aside up to $270 tax-free dollars from payroll per month per Vanpool occupant. From the money set aside, Vanpoolers don't pay income tax and employers don't pay FICA. So really, Vanpool is a very stable, safe, and reliable component of our regional transportation system. We currently have 161 Vanpools serving essential workers at our VA hospitals, at MacDill Air Force Base, the TSA employees at Tampa International Airport and St. Petersburg Airport as well, the Coast Guard, and many other different locations throughout the region. For Hillsborough County, 71 of these vans travel every day to James A. Haley, and 54 go to MacDill. 7 travel to the Tampa International Airport, just to give you some perspective of the number of vehicles that are actually on the road. For the month of August, the Vanpool program saved 757,000 vehicle miles. Our average one-way Vanpool trip is 31 miles, and the longest that we run is right at about 86 miles. These long-haul distances are services not easily accommodated by the local transit operators. And as a member of the CAC, you can really help advocate for Vanpool services by making sure that the Hillsborough TPO is asking for money from the state of Florida, who receives a CMAQ money. CMAQ really stands for Congestion Management and Air Quality. This is a program from the Federal Highway Administration to improve both air quality and traffic congestion. So I want to thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about this. You know, I think I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I want to now just kind of pass this back over to Sarah for a wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah, so real quickly, Ken briefly mentioned something known as the Qualified Transportation Fringe Benefit. What he was referring to was a section of the Internal Revenue Code. It's section 132, and basically the Revenue Code allows employers to provide their employees with a variety of fringe benefits. There's like 7 different ones. One of them is a transportation fringe benefit that allows employers to set aside up to $270 per month per employee for transportation purposes. By doing so, that reduces the employee's gross pay, so it reduces their federal income tax, and also by doing that for all those employees that participate in it, it reduces the payroll tax that the employer pays. So it's a win-win opportunity that very few employers know about or take advantage of. So Christine and Ken and I were trying to figure out, well, what would be a good starting point for the Hillsborough TPO to kind of take a deeper dive into transportation demand management? And there's so many things that could potentially be done. What we would like to recommend is for the TPO staff to look further into the possibility of applying what's known as a commuter benefits ordinance at the local level. So if the TPO staff could look at how that might be implemented at the local level. They're typically done locally. There are 7 different cities in the United States that already do it. It provides a lot of good benefits to employees and employers. And basically what an ordinance would do would require employees to set aside the $270. It wouldn't necessarily be out of pocket at all for the employers. They'd actually be saving money depending upon how the program is arranged. So with that, I'll close.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Sarah, so much. So that's our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions or to hear the committee's response to Sarah's closing remarks about the commuter benefits ordinance. I think as Katrina aptly included in our comprehensive plan mobility updates, TDM is a part of it, but we know that any people and organizations do things either because they want to or because they have to. And so we can't measure against goals unless we put some framework in there that to which organizations or employers in this case would have to adhere to. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, Sarah, and Ken. Very interesting. My first thought before I take comment from the committee is if there is a draft or a sample ordinance that you might provide to the staff, I think that might be a good place to start to follow up on your suggestion. Other comments or questions from the committee? Johnny, I can't see everyone, so I don't know if there are electronic hands raised or not. Nope. Certainly good information. We appreciate you bringing it to us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair and staff.
Thank you, Christine. We'll put that on. I'll put that on my members' interest reminder notice to check on that one at our next meeting. Then, real good.
Chair, if you don't mind, could I clarify what the proposal was from the presenters? I'm not really sure that I understood. Was it for TPO staff to research what a commuter benefit ordinance would look like, or was it to see if we offer a commuter benefit ordinance ourselves, like the TPO?
Yeah, so I think a starting point would be for the TPO staff to better understand what it is and how it has been applied across the United States by various municipalities. And I could provide information to the TPO staff about that to kind of have a better sense of what it could potentially do in Hillsborough, and become comfortable with the possibility that that could be a recommendation that the TPO could then advance to the municipalities, the local governments in Hillsborough, the 3 cities and Hillsborough County, as something for the local governments to consider implementing.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I'm sure we'll be in touch on this topic soon.
Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you again. We will move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the FDOT freight update. Ryan Hunter. Aha.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir. All right, so my name is Brian Hunter. I'm the freight coordinator in the Office of Modal Development over at the Florida Department of Transportation. Next slide, please. So freight is very important to our economy and the department. So here in Tampa Bay, or in Hillsborough County specifically, we have about 140 million square feet of industrial building that supports 25,000 jobs. We also have 56 million tons of imported materials of some sort that have a $55 billion impact or value. And we export 28 million tons with a value of $37 billion. So 64% of that is by truck, and 23% is through the seaport, and about 12% is through rail. And so the department also has a mission to provide a safe and reliable transportation system for goods movement to support those industries and those jobs here. And so we've undertaken a number of initiatives recently to move the needle on that. And I'm going to give you a quick recap on about 6 or 8 of those. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Next slide, please. So recently we went through and we updated our freight priorities. We have had a lot of improvements on the freight network recently, so we wanted to make sure we were still focused on those projects that would have the biggest impact. And what we did this time was we split them out into 2 different categories. So on the left, you'll see we have capacity, which are your traditional interstate capacity, as well as grade separations like US 41. South of Causeway Boulevard over the CSX tracks there at Rockport, and also some truck parking facilities, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And then we also, on the right, it's a new category for us. These are operational or interim improvements. So these include a series of interchange improvements along I-4 east of I-75, as well as some off interstate improvements like at State Road 60 at US 41, as well as State Road 60 at Dover Road. If you want to see this in a little more detail and actually in a size that you can read, you can go to tampabayfreight.com, and that is the repository of all of our planning information and project information that we have. Next slide. Another program that we put a lot of emphasis into here in District 7 is the National Highway Freight Program. So this is a formula program by FHWA. They give the state about $55 million a year. We at the district level apply to central office for these funds with specific projects. And the projects have to be on the National Highway Freight Network, which is designated by FHWA. So here in Hillsborough County, that is pretty much all of I-4 and 275 from the downtown interchange to the west, as well as I-75. And then we have a couple of intermodal connectors that connect to the port along Causeway and then US 41 to like Port Red Wing area or Pendola Point. And then we have a connector that goes from I-75 over to Red Wing as well. And so we've had 13 projects or 14 projects that were funded previously that were about $72 million. We just found out we have another 3 projects that are going to be funded for an additional $25 million. So we're right at about $100 million that we've been able to capture for freight improvements in the district. Next slide. We also recently completed a freight bottleneck analysis. And so what we did with this analysis was every time we do freight planning, we're always challenged by data and how do we acquire that data. So we took a look at all of the free and readily available data sources that are available to us out there. We evaluated them for which one would have the best information for us in freight planning and which one had the information that we could quickly and easily go back in and do another, update our analysis. So after we evaluated about 10 or 15 data sources, the RIDIS database by FHWA was the one that we settled upon. And we did an analysis of all the surface state roads, so non-interstate state roads. And this is our top 10 list based on the data analysis. Some of them do include interstates, like the number 1, State Road 60 at I-75. And the bottleneck is actually on the surface street, not on the interstate. And so this is a process that we can go through and we can do it very quickly and cost effectively to update it. That way, when we implement an improvement, we can see whether we dropped the bottleneck off we made the improvement we were hoping to make. And also we can stay on top of those that provide the highest value to the transportation and logistics sectors. Next slide. And so another thing that we have piloted here in the district is our freight operational improvement program. So this is where I'll go out and I'll talk to truck drivers or warehouse managers, transportation managers at some of these distribution centers, and I'll ask them where they're having operational issues. They can tell me right then, they can give me a call, they can shoot me an email. I also have a website that I hand out a flyer on that they can go online and they can let us know of these issues. When those issues come into us, we evaluate them to make sure they are a legitimate issue, and then we evaluate them for cause and figure out what the proposed improvement would be. We prioritize them, and then we put them in a list and get them in the pipeline to create a concept for it. And once we have all that done, we use a push button design build to go out there and quickly implement a solution. So far we have done 13 of these projects. I have about a $2 million annual budget for this program. And this year we're gonna address another 4 or 5 issues. And then on the next slide, I'll show you 2 of the projects that we have been working on. So the top one is State Road 39 at State Road 39A, which is just north of I-4 in Plant City. So the issue that truckers were having out there is if they were coming north on 39A and making the left-hand turn to go down to the interstate, if they were pulling into that median, there were some safety concerns. And also if they were hanging a U-turn, they were off tracking. And so what we did is we went in there and put in a median island to create a safe refuge for those truck drivers. And we also put in a pavement bulb out. And that project was completed about a year ago. The bottom one on the screen is State Road 60 at 34th Street. This is a highly industrial area. There's a ton of industry that occurs there. And the problem is for the southbound to westbound turning movement. So there, the trucks have to make a choice of whether they drive up on the existing pork chop or they pull over the sidewalk. So what we're going to do with our project is we're going to go in and we're going to remove that pedestrian island pork chop, and we're going to make that turning radius a little better for trucks. But in the process, we're going to make a significant amount of pedestrian improvements out there as well. We want to make sure that we're serving all users of that corridor And so this one is in design right now, and it'll go to construction in the next 3 or 4 months. We're also going to resurface the road because this area has a pretty bad rutting situation out there. Some of those ruts are 6 to 8 inches deep. So we're gonna go out there and put in a higher quality asphalt that should prevent that for a little bit longer. Next slide, please. And as I said, the State Road 39 project has already been implemented. It was constructed last year. So on the left, you can see the before condition where it was just an open median. And on the right, you can see where we put in that pedestrian or the median island to provide that safe refuge for truck drivers, as well as that little bit of asphalt pavement bulb out so that truck drivers don't have to off track and potentially get stuck out there. Next slide. And then one of the other things that we have been undertaking are some freight sub-area studies. So this is where we go to an industrial area, we pick a zone that has some older industrial properties in it, and we look at what's going on out there, what can we do to support or improve the operations that are currently occurring. And then we also look at what would happen if those areas are redeveloped. So industrial development, the building standards has changed pretty dramatically in the last 10 years. We used to see 20 to 30 foot clear height inside these buildings. Now we're seeing 40 feet clear height. We've also seen an increase, 2 to 3 times the amount of truck bays in some of these buildings. And so some of the buildings in these areas are older. They might be reaching the end of their useful life. And if they're redeveloped, what is that going to happen? What is that going to do to our transportation network? And what type of improvements do we need to be planning for to support those new developments? So we get a list of projects that come out of it, and we either implement them through the push button design build project if it's relatively small. If we have a construction project coming through on one of the corridors, we try and get it in there. And if not, we can just design a standalone construction project. So we've done 2 of these studies so far. The first one on your screen is Sable Park, which is basically Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard down to the crosstown and from I-75 over to Orient Road. We've exempted out all of the residential areas that are to the southeast in that kind of quadrant. And we had a lot of improvements or suggestions that came out of this study. Some of them were, simple operational improvements, like at US 301 at Mazzaro Boulevard, which provides access to the old Ace Hardware. And there's also a couple big bakery distribution centers back there. Some of them were very simple, like striping improvements at US 301 and Brittany. And then one was a signal modification, a way that we can, make the turning movement easier at Palm River at US 301. Next slide. And then the second area that we studied was Drew Park, which is just basically to the north and east of Tampa International Airport. And so some of the recommendations that came out of there was a realignment and operational improvement at Anderson, at Hillsborough, as well as exploring safety opportunities along Martin Luther King Jr. from West Shore over to Dale Mabry. And also there's a pretty significant need for some truck parking and staging facilities in this area out there. So that's something that we're going to take a look at moving forward. Next slide, please. And so as I just mentioned, we have some pretty significant needs for truck parking in the Tampa Bay region. There's a couple of reasons for that. A couple years ago, they reduced the hours of operations for truck drivers. And then pretty closely after that, they instituted electronic logging. And so it used to be if a truck driver needed to drive an extra 3 minutes to find a safe and secure truck parking spot, they could do that. Their logbook was a little more flexible. Now with electronic logging devices, they can't. When that clock hits 0, they have to be stopped or else they face some pretty significant fines. So what we've seen is the truck drivers are having to park in empty parking lots or on the shoulders of ramps, shoulders of interstates, and we don't want them to do that. We want them to park in safe and secure facilities that provide them with the services and that they need. And so we're addressing that from two different angles. One is our rest areas. We are expanding the rest areas. A couple years ago, maybe 7 or 8, we expanded the rest areas in Pasco County, and now we're doing the same thing in southern Hillsborough County, south of Sun City. Those 2 rest areas are being reconstructed, and we're going to add a total of 130 truck parking spots down there. So we'll have almost 200 in the southern area of Hillsborough County. And then the second way that we are addressing this need is with the construction of a new truck parking facility off of County Line Road and I-4. And that's what you're seeing the concept for on the screen. So this area is one of the fastest growing industrial areas in the country. There's probably 15 million plus square feet on County Line Road. If you have not been out there in the last 3 years, take a drive down there. You'll be absolutely amazed at how much industrial property has been built. And so we are acquiring the property. It closes in 9 days on the piece of property you see here. We have design in 2023 and construction in 2027 on this truck parking facility that will have about 120 truck parking spots as well as restrooms like you would see at a rest area. To the east of here, there's a truck fueling station as well as a couple of restaurants and a hotel. So truck drivers will have easy access to those services, but they'll also be able to park in our safe and secure facility. And we're happy to be able to move that project forward. Next slide. And the last thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is our Assist Quick Fix connector project that we have here, which is 62nd Street, which is the access road from Columbus and Broadway to the CSX Intermodal Yard. It is a older facility that is kind of in difficult condition right now. It is a narrow road. It floods really badly. And so we're using the Assist Quick Fix connector program to go in and rebuild that road. We're going to redo the drainage. Right now it's open ditch and it floods really badly. And so we're going to put in drainage facilities as well as include a 12-foot shared use path on the west side of the road. And so it's a great example of a complete streets project that really is meeting the needs of all of the roadway users, including truck drivers and bicyclists and pedestrians. Next slide. And then I just want to leave you guys with a little bit of a safety message. If you drive a car, you're going to interact with trucks. Trucks have much different operating characteristics. If you've ever been in one, you know that there are huge blind spots. So when you're around one, be aware of that. Don't hang out in what they call the no zone. You've probably all seen this before, but it's worth a refresher. Just remember, don't hang out there and be safe when you operate around a truck. And then next slide. So like I said, my name is Brian Hunter. Here's my contact information, and the website that I was mentioning earlier is tampabayfreight.com. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. That's really interesting, and I'm glad to see you're giving attention to Drew Park. That's an area that's experiencing a lot of growth. Questions from the committee or comments? Johnny, I'll defer to you if there are electronic hands raised.
No comments in the chat yet. Looks
Right.
like Christine.
I have a question.
Christine, go ahead.
Brian, are you giving this presentation at the West Shore Alliance Transportation Committee? Are they queued up to hear this?
No, they are not.
Okay. I might reach you outside of this on email just to suggest that, at least for the Drew Park area. Very important interface with that district. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good suggestion, Christine. Any other questions? Brian, this is interesting. Freight is a critical component of our region, and between CSX and the port, we have a lot of freight moving through this area. So thanks for bringing this to our attention. I'm sure you'll get some comments back from the committee separately.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Okay, and the next item on our status report is a 2021 State of the System report. Vishaka, are you going to give this report still?
Yes, I am going to if you're ready.
Good, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'm just waiting a minute for the presentation to open.
Okay.
I'll close it. 1 second. Sorry. I've closed it, Johnny.
All right.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. Sorry, I didn't realize you needed the PowerPoint.
I'll try to be brief, committee. I know you've been here a long time since morning, but this is Vishaka Shivaraman, MPO, TPO staff member for the record. And I'll be giving you a status update on the State of the System 2021 report today. Johnny, next slide, please. Again, I would like to introduce you to the state of the system. It's been a while since we updated. This is one of the reports that the TPO updates every 2 or 3 years. And this time we are coming back with an update after 3 years. So we have data starting from 2018 through 2020. The state of the system report, as you all might know, that it tracks the usage of the transportation system. It reports the data trends over the years, so we will know how the system performed. And thereby it helps us to evaluate the investment for each program and by each jurisdiction. And finally, it helps us to know whether we are on the right track and make progress towards a safer and a more efficient transportation system. Next slide, please. So according to the FHWA guidelines and the MAP 21 measures is what guides the report. And TPOs are supposed to maintain this. We are supposed to track these 6 conditions mentioned here, being safety, roadway level of service, transit, non-motorized, meaning bike, walk, etc., infrastructure conditions of the roads and the pavements, and emissions. Next slide, please. Again, I would like to mention here that if you had seen the report in the past in 2018, it was a report where we had the data trends, the charts, and everything measured and presented in a report form. This year, we wanted to get creative, so we came up with a consultant who's Urban SDK, and they are one of them who has built a similar platform for multiple jurisdictions, multiple TPOs across the state. And they are building us an interactive online platform whereby you can see the data, some of the measures what I mentioned here earlier. You can see them, track them, and then create reports. This is a publicly available platform, and the link is here as mentioned above. You can go and look into this website and see the measures for yourself. So just to give you another quick update, the data comes from various sources. The safety comes from Signal 4, the roadway LOS comes from ACS and FDOT. Some of the other data, including non-motorized bike lanes, sidewalks, etc., and emissions were provided by Plan Hillsborough. The infrastructure condition, we collected it from the various jurisdictions, and the transit data came from the National Transit Database. And I'll show you in a minute. I'll just quickly brush through some of these measures. Next slide, please. The first one being the safety trends. The main factors what we accounted for were the annual fatality rate per 100 million VMT, the serious injury and the serious injury rates, the annual average non-motorized fatalities and injuries. We also recorded the number of crashes by year, the number of fatalities and the serious injuries by year, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries by year. Next slide, please. The dashboard itself, what we built, as I mentioned earlier, is an online platform. There are three parts to it, if I would call it that way. One is a dashboard where you can see it in numbers. Then you can go and pull the report as a CSV and export it. You can also go and look at it in a map version. So the first one, the first one what you saw was charts. This is a map version, and it has a time scrub in the bottom. So by clicking this, you can see how the fatalities have varied over the years. And here we have data starting from 2016 through 2020. And this timestamp will show you kind of what are the hard crash areas. The next report, the next item is the roadway level of service. We recorded the total hours of delay, vehicle miles traveled, and mean travel time to work. Next slide. Again, the roadway level of service is reported in the dashboard form, what you see here towards the left side, which is the total number of miles reported for 2018, which is mainly for the state roadways, state and the national highways. And also you can see the travel time to work. You can note that it varies a little bit. It increases over the period of 5 years reported from 2015 through 2019. Next slide, please. The next measure what we accounted for was the transit performance, where we measure the transit ridership, which is a passenger trips as an average for 5 years, total average trip length, passengers per revenue miles, per revenue hours, for the three modes, which were bus, streetcar, and demand service, and average fleet in years for the same three measures, three categories. Next slide, please. Again, this is the transit data, which is in the chart form, and you can see it as a stacked chart with the three, with bus, streetcar, and demand response on the for the passenger revenues per mile and per revenue hour. Next slide, please. The next category, what we measured was the non-motorized travel. So for this, as I mentioned before, Plan Hillsborough provided some of the shapefiles, and what you see here on this on the graphic towards the left is a map where where we recorded the sidewalk lanes, which are in the white lines. We also noted the total miles of paved trails and shared use paths. We also calculated the total miles of bike lanes by year starting from 2018 through 2020. What you see on the graphic on the left is the accessibility to the places of interest, which were schools, hospitals, grocery stores, and sidewalk. This was very important to know from an equity perspective, and also to see how people can access some of these locations safely and efficiently. So, which is why this was one of the interesting measures. Next slide, please. The next one is the infrastructure. These data were provided to us by the city, county, and the jurisdictions and the FDOT. We recorded the number of, we recorded the payment conditions, which is a PCI, Payment Condition Index, and that has been categorized accordingly into 4 categories: good, fair, medium, and poor. So with that, that is the map on the left side, which is, I know it was a screenshot of the website, but you can see that the greens are all the better condition roads, and the reds are all the poor condition. And likewise for bridge, we got it from the NHS data, and you can notice that in the Hillsborough region, most of the bridges are in good and fair condition. Next slide, please. The last category, what we measured was the emission from automobiles. We reported 2 different types of data. One was the carbon dioxide emissions by year. And you can note here that this was actually a data what we received from a subset of NASA. And this data set only gave us data till 2017, but from that you can see that a little bit the emissions have gone up. The carbon dioxide emissions have gone up in the 5 years from 2013 through 2017. Likewise, the total emission of carbon dioxide, and also we also measured the NOx, which is the nitrogen oxides, and the VOC, volatile organic compounds, and those are reported as well in the dashboard. Next slide, please. With that, I can take any questions if you have at this time, but please note, committee, that this is just a status update, and I will be coming back to you with the final presentation. At that time, we will go through the trends, and also we will look more detail into the infrastructure and the spending categories for investment levels for these programs.
Good, thank you, Vishaka. Josh Frank, you have a question.
Yeah, really informative, and I'm glad to see progress on this. A quick question in terms of the transit data. I'm curious, there really doesn't exist any great housing for transit data in terms of map data to the same extent that you had some of the other indicators in your presentation. You know, for example, seeing ridership per route, and also seeing that on a map to show where that inequity may exist in terms of ridership and transit access. So I'm curious, it seems like you may have that data. Have you looked into adding that into sort of a more graphic map format?
Yes, Josh, Frank, thanks for the question. Actually, like I mentioned before, this is a work in progress, and we haven't completed importing all the data into the dashboard, but we can surely take a look and see if we can get the routes, we can get the passengers, the transit data for per route.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, because that's something that really does not exist anywhere, and is a piece of data that I'm constantly trying to find information on, and it's always either buried in a PDF somewhere or in a report from a few years back. So having it in one place would be fantastic. The second, I'm sorry.
That's something I can get in touch with Hart and see if we can incorporate that. We just went with the federal measures that are required, so that's why we stuck with the basics. But I can definitely check if there are ways we can incorporate that.
Yeah, totally understand. I think this is a great opportunity to also add that piece of information. I just had one other small quick point of something, because I think this is such a great opportunity. One other sort of maybe relevant piece of information that may be part of one of these data sets you already have, that I'm also constantly trying to find information on, I think it would be beneficial, is to perhaps have some sort of layer of just who owns what roadway and where jurisdictions may start and stop. I know that's a bit complicated potentially to show, but even if just from a basic perspective, highlighting which corridors are DOT corridors, which corridors are county corridors, which ones are city corridors, which ones are unincorporated, those sorts of things, having some sort of one place for that information would also, I think, be beneficial. I don't know if this is the home for that, but it seems like you may already have some of that data, so it might be worthwhile to add. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a good. I mean, I think did you mention that in the infrastructure conditions? Because we have the data from the different jurisdictions. We just categorize them according to the condition level rather than the jurisdiction level. But we do have that level of detail that we can provide to you where each jurisdiction is.
Right,
but if you're
right.
looking for just the roadway layers, that's pretty easy to add into it. And this is just a forum for measuring the performance. But if you're looking for something in particular like that, and I can provide to you separately, I can do that.
Yeah, no, either way, I just think it might be helpful. In fact, you bring it up to show, for example, City of Tampa roadway conditions versus City of Temple Terrace roadway conditions, and how those compare perhaps to county level conditions. So it's not necessarily a very complex piece of data, but is something that would potentially be very useful in
that's a good suggestion.
analyzing.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at it from that level. Yeah, we can compare it from different jurisdiction level. That's a good suggestion. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, one of the things that Vishaka hadn't yet mentioned is that this is just Hillsborough County's platform. We've been working on getting a joint partnership with all the TPOs around the region to go in and acquire this tool and have it available to Citrus, Hernando, Pasco, Pinellas, us, Sarasota. We want to have everybody on the same platform. This particular consultant has clients in South Florida. Jacksonville is like their home base. They recently brought Orlando on board. And so we're looking to the future of having all MPOs across the entire state have access to the same data sets. That would obviously eliminate the potential for inaccurate analyses and just encourage sharing of data much better than the systems that we currently have in place. So we're in the very early stages, but based on what you saw in Vishaka's presentation, it seems very promising.
Yeah, and I also think this can be a platform we can build on it, and that's something I can explain at another time. But we have the capability of adding any data set to this dashboard, or you can create like a database form of it. So this tool has that capability of adding any data we want.
Vishaka, thank you very much. It's a good presentation. It's always good to get these updates, and we'll look forward to the more final version when you can.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. As we come to the close of the meeting, the last item I'd like to touch on is see if there is an update on the transportation surtax. Johnny, were you or someone going to present that item?
Josh Barber is actually here. Josh is our liaison to the Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Board. So I'm gonna turn it over to him.
Josh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Roberts, and thank you, Johnny. Yeah, Josh Barber here, TPO staff. As Johnny said, I'm the liaison to the Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Board. The Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Board recently decided to form a subcommittee to explore the impacts of the overturned transportation tax on the mobility and access of the transportation disadvantaged. That is those who are disabled, low income, elderly, and children at risk as well. In staff discussions with the TPO, we kicked around the idea of forming a joint subcommittee with the TDCB and the CAC to explore this in tandem. So I'm bringing this before you all to see if there are any members of the CAC that would be interested in participating in this. We do have Artie Fryer on our subcommittee already. He is the TDCB appointee to the CAC, so he liaisons between the two boards. I'm happy to take any questions and any volunteers.
Okay. Quick questions of Josh on that new subcommittee or persons interested in serving on it.
And ultimately,
sorry, man.
I was going to say that ultimately would hopefully come out as some support for a new transportation tax ultimately.
Right.
Josh, does the TDCB have an idea of how many members they'd like to have our subcommittee be?
Not currently. Right now we have 4 members on our subcommittee, including Mr. Fryer.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Rick Fernandez, you're recognized.
Well, only to volunteer. If you have a seat at the table, I'd be happy to be involved in that subcommittee.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm sure Josh will add you to the list. Anybody else have a comment or want to volunteer to serve on that committee? Well, Josh, keep us posted.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair Roberts.
All right. Very good. Is there any other new business to come before the committee? We've reached the noon hour. We've done pretty well today. Our next meeting will be November the 3rd. I've informed staff that I will not be available for that meeting, so your illustrious Vice Chair, Mr. Fernandez, will likely be presiding at that meeting. So thank you all for attending. This was a good meeting. We had a lot of good information. Hopefully our next meeting we'll be able to get a quorum and take some action on some of these important items that are coming before us. I will give the TPO board a report of this committee meeting and some of the thoughts, sharing some of the thoughts that we had today. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Good job. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.